I would like to, first of all, indicate that Kevin Hayden was here. However, in anticipation of a 1:15 starting time, he thought he would be out because he was going to go first because his children are going to summer camp and they don't get to drop them off at the bus at the school. They all have to individually drive the kids to camp up in Maine.
Oh, my God.
So it was either give him a chance to get rid of his kids for 3 weeks or stay here to testify.
Not sure
He is
that's
he's the chair, am I using the right term?
Yes, he's the chairman.
He's the chairman of the Sex Offender Registry Board. He is going to be forwarding to you a letter that for your perusal as to what he would have testified to had he not had to leave. And besides, his wife would have been waiting for him and that would have been worse. So at this time, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first witness, Judge David Paradis, who was, he's not here.
He's on the elevator.
He's on the elevator. All right. First Assistant Chief Keith Gibbings from the probation, Juvenile Court Probation Department in Springfield, Massachusetts.
Good afternoon, counselors. Thanks for having me today. I'd just like to read a brief statement I prepared on behalf of Mrs. HoSang. Again, my name is Keith Gibbings. I'm employed by the Massachusetts Probation Service as the First Assistant Chief Probation Officer of the Hampden County Juvenile Court. I've been working with court-involved youth for over 35 years. I've known Mrs. HoSang since 2009 when she worked first for the Youth Villages. She then gained employment with the Department of Children and Families as a social worker from 2010 to 2014. During that time, I had many experiences working with Mrs. HoSang. Most recently, I was her mentor when she was hired as a probation officer in 2014 and eventually became her supervisor from 2015 to 2020. Sherquita has demonstrated over her career to be professional, dependable, compassionate, team-oriented, and most of all, possesses integrity. She has served the high-risk youth and families across Western Massachusetts through community-based services and court-involved services. She's excelled in community supervision and conducting home visits, school visits, and program visits with her probationers. Her diversity and cultural proficiency was a strength in her daily responsibilities. Her priority was always to maintain mass probation service policy and procedure while ensuring public safety and victims' rights. When I first met Mrs. HoSang in 2009, she was a community outreach worker. We'd actually shared a mutual client together. I was immediately impressed by her ability to effectively communicate with the child and the family. This may sound simple, but when working with children displaying mental health and behavioral issues, as well as skeptical parents, her professional demeanor and calming influence made a lasting impression on myself. I had been in the juvenile justice field for 23 years at the time, and I was extremely impressed with her presentation. 5 years later, when I heard she was being interviewed for a probation position, I immediately informed my chief how highly respected she was at DCF and my prior experiences interacting with her on a professional level. Sherquita's vast experience includes dealing with families through care and protection cases, child requiring assistance, as well as delinquency and youthful offender cases. To clarify, for the youthful offender cases, these are children between the ages of 14 and 18 and they're being prosecuted as adults in juvenile court. These cases are very difficult to manage considering this age group that could face state prison sentences. This contradicts everything we are taught in assessing the needs of children. However, Sherquita always maintained a well-balanced approach on these cases. Her clinical skills and diverse background allowed her to excel in setting up treatment plans, risk assessments, accountability in the community. She has always been well respected by her colleagues, the defense bar, and prosecutors. She was also held in very high regard within a local law enforcement, the public school system, and the outside agencies. I have no reservation stating for the record that Mrs. HoSang will serve the Commonwealth and Governor Baker with nothing short of excellence and integrity as a member of the Parole Board.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And hold on one second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is there anybody here who has any questions or what?
So we all had an email this morning about some lawyer saying that's punitive. You ever had any indication
in being her supervisor for the 5 years prior to her moving on to the SOAR board, I've never experienced that with Mrs. HoSang. She's always used the graduated sanctions. She's come to me for case conferencing, difficult cases, especially some of the youthful offender cases. She's always used evidence-based practices and mass probation policy and procedure, such as many times we'll have what we call administrative hearings short of a violation of probation being issued, where they would sit down with myself, the probation officer, the family, and the child or young adult that's on probation. And we would try to ensure that we can get through whatever problems are occurring at home or in the community prior to having a violation of probation issue. So my answer to that, Counselor, is that Mrs. HoSang has always held her probationers accountable and enforced court orders that the judges have set. Never once have I ever thought she was punitive in nature.
Thank you. That's all I need. Thank you.
Anyone else? Hearing no other questions, you're excused. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to hear from Judge David Paradis of the Springfield Juvenile Court, who was before this body, how long ago, David?
In December of 2000, year and a half ago,
Right, so he's been here before.
2019.
He's a juvenile court judge.
That's right.
Yeah.
I remember.
So, good afternoon. I want to thank all the counselors for letting me be here and speak on behalf of Sherquita HoSang. My name is David Paris. I'm currently a judge, as you heard, in juvenile court sitting in Springfield and Holyoke. Even though Sherquita is a probation officer, during my time as a judge, our interactions was limited because of the pandemic. I came on in January, trained until February. It was only February to March and the pandemic hit. So we didn't have a tremendous amount of interaction in the courts, but our interaction was prior to me becoming a judge. Prior to becoming a judge, I was a supervising attorney for all the private attorneys practicing in Hampden County that worked in the juvenile court. During this period of time, I think my interactions with Sherquita would best describe her approach as a probation officer. During that time, I had a heavy caseload of delinquency and youthful offender cases. We would interact or discuss cases on a weekly basis. She was very warm and inviting, not only to attorneys that practiced there, but also the children and families that she served. The kids and families that I worked with spoke highly of her. They felt that they'd been heard when they had meetings with her. She was always open to new ideas and information. I just remember sitting her, always open when you go to her office to talk about a case. We'd sit there and discuss cases that was on that day or upcoming. She was never one of those. I've had probation officers where my mind is made up. I don't want to hear anything. She was never that way. She would always take the information. Sometimes she would always present to the court whatever information you provided. Sometimes it would change her view of the case, and sometimes it wouldn't. It would always be fact-based. At the time, she never had a cookies cutter approach. She was always one that paid attention to the individual differences of the children, the family dynamic going on, and the facts of the case. She was always supportive of the children and the families, even if her position differed from theirs. If she thought perhaps a child needed to be either committed to Department of Youth Services or put conditions in place that the family or maybe the attorney didn't want, she was always very supportive to them. She always took public safety or the best interest of the child into account when indicating what the sentence recommendation should be. She was also very community organized, involved otherwise. She was part of the trial court's initiative, the Cultural Appreciation Day in Hampden County. I know that she spearheaded that for 2018 and 2019. I always participated in that myself. She was always participating in fundraisers. I ate too many donuts that she presented with fundraisers. I enjoyed my time working with it. I think the important part with Sherquita is really she was gathering the information, and I think it'll do well for the parole board that she would leave no stone unturned. She would really, my view of life decisions, court orders, SORB decisions, parole hearings, if the information's bad, the decision's going to be bad, garbage in, garbage out. And she was one that would gather the information important and present to the court so we could have an informed decision, or the court could have an informed decision. So for these reasons, I implore you to confirm Sherquita HoSang's nomination. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, Counselor
Thank you.
Juvenile?
How you doing?
I'm doing well. It
How's
was,
the job been?
I enjoy, it's a lot. I've kind of became the tech person for juvenile court. So I did trainings for all the judges, doing all the Zoom hearings and things, but it's different. A lot of the judges say, it's so much more work or harder, but I wouldn't know any better because I became a judge right when it happened. So this is all I know. But it's now we're transitioning to in person. I think people like it, though. I think the Zoom will stay. I think on some you can have more involvement, even for adoptions. There are families that want to participate in it and they're out of state. I think it's great for that. I think it's great for kids not missing school. You can probably do some Zoom things where 3 o'clock rather than having to miss school and things. So I think the technology be there. I think we're behind in technology. I think this helped boost it, but I enjoy it. I'm not burnt out. I enjoy going to work every day.
Are you doing mostly care and protection type stuff?
I run the entire delinquency session as far as setting it up. I try to do staggered presentations. I do temporary custody hearings. I'm not carrying a load of the care and protections. Because of my background, they wanted me to try to handle the youthful offender and delinquency matters. We had to open the mall, Eastfield Mall, for hearings. We had a couple separate the cases resolved. It's going to go through August where we'll do a jury trials there. So I do a lot of the temporary custody hearings on that, and I do a lot of the caseloads on, unfortunately, I have a lot of active cases. I just heard a number that we have 22 open gun charges pending just in the juvenile court, never mind other courts. So there's quite a bit of either youthful offender or gun-related offenses in just our county, never mind statewide.
Glad for you.
All right.
Enjoy it.
Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you, Judge Paradis.
Thank you for your time.
Nice seeing you.
Seeing you again.
Thank you for coming, and you can leave or,
No, thank you.
all right. Before I introduce the nominee, Counselor Kennedy, were you able to get a date for your nominee, Asha White?
Not yet. I have to speak with them. We haven't had the opportunity yet.
Okay. So that finishes the housekeeping issues. At this time, I would like to introduce to the council Sherquita HoSang, the nominee for the parole board position.
Thank you.
You may. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
But before you start, if you want to introduce the folks that are here,
Yes, that was part of my,
then just go
Yes.
ahead.
thank you. Good afternoon. First, I would like to thank God for being here today. I am truly honored, humbled, and grateful for such an opportunity as this. I would like to thank Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito for having the confidence and faith in me to nominate me to be a member of the Massachusetts State Parole Board. I would like to thank Secretary Turco and Undersecretary Andy Peck for their encouragement and support. I would like to thank my witnesses who have previously introduced themselves. And Kevin Hayden in his absence, and also Delano Bailey from CPCS Child Advocacy. Thank you so much for being here, taking time out of your busy schedule to come and be in support of my nomination. Thank you. I would like to thank those members of my family who are present here today. My mother, Sherry Thomas Edwards, who is the strongest woman I know. I would like to thank my aunt, Tawana, my uncle, Howie, my aunt, Myra, my aunt, Karen, and my uncle, Steve, and my uncle, Jeff, whom I have to brag about, had the opportunity to sing at President Barack Obama's second term inauguration.
Wow, good for you.
Thank you. These individuals and my family are part of the support, but played a major role in my upbringing, growing up as a child, and in my role, play a role in my life today. Not last but not least, I want to thank my husband, who sits over here, the gray suit on, Parole HoSang. This man encourages me and he inspires me to be better. I would like to introduce my children who are not present with us today. Sage Kennedy, age 12, my daughter Destiny Beasley, age 15, my stepson Landon HoSang, age 10, my stepdaughter Kimura HoSang, age 13, and our youngest Micah HoSang, age 1 and 9 months years old. As I said, they're not here with us today, but I'm sure they'll be listening to this on YouTube later this evening. Most especially, I would like to thank you, counselors, for affording me the time during this process. I've appreciated each and every conversation over this past week and the attention and care in which you consider candidates through this process. Thank you. Now I know the question here today is whether I would be a good fit for the parole board. You have had the opportunity to review my resume and know my professional experiences, but I wanted to let you know more about my personal ones and how they intersect with my professional career. It is the balance and the personal and professional experience that make me a unique voice for the parole board. I am someone who shows up for people and for my community. Being an individual who has been faced with periods of crisis and pain, the support of my family and my community helped to strengthen me. Born and raised in Springfield, Massachusetts, I grew up in a dual parent household with my 2 brothers and several blended siblings. My father, James Thomas, was a school teacher, a mentor, and a veteran. My mother is currently a career counselor for young adults at the Westover Job Corps and has been for the past 30 years. From a young age, my parents instilled in me faith, a strong work ethic, and to be dedicated to family and my community. My mother came from a Christian family, and we often served in the church, and that was a large part of my life growing up, and it still is today. However, I also understood from a young age the overreaching effects of addiction and the toll it can play on one's life and those who love them. My father passed away when I was 10 years old, and my mother worked extremely hard.
Take a breath.
To make ends meet. Because of the foundation that my parents gave me, I was able to stay focused on my faith. Excuse me, I'm sorry.
You want to,
Just 2 seconds.
okay,
Okay, got it.
there you go.
Caught it. I caught it. Okay, there it goes. Thank you. Because of the foundation, I was able to focus on my faith in God and my education during that difficult time. I benefited from a solid support system. That support given to me planted the seed of showing up for others in time of need, because that gives people the will to go on. While working as a camp counselor at the Martin Luther King, it's great. At the Martin Luther King Junior Community Center, I mentored young inner city kids, and I gave them the same love and support that I received when I was their age. When I went on to UMass Amherst, I became a peer mentor and a resident assistant, finding myself drawn to working and connecting with others. While there, I majored in legal studies, which led me to an internship in the Hampshire District Court. I shadowed the now retired Judge Nancy Dusick Gomes, and then that was when I double majored in sociology. I seen a connection between reoffending and societal problems. It was apparent. While obtaining my master's in social work, I juggled parenting for the first time, completed school assignments and internships, all while working a full job to support and provide for my son. Had I not persevered, I would not have been fortunate enough to become educated in the socioeconomic issues which revealed disproportions and access to resources and issues related to privilege, power, and control. I gained understanding of the health and addiction, mental health and addiction, and its connection to the criminal justice system. I became passionate about societal issues and wanted to take on the challenges of working with problematic adolescents as an intercept counselor through Youth Villages. Youth Villages is an agency that provides help for children and young people who face a wide range of emotional and mental and behavioral problems. I additionally worked as a counselor at the Behavioral Health Network Community Crisis Stabilization Unit for adults in need of temporary crisis. Being afforded an opportunity to be a social worker and a probation officer at the Juvenile Court, I worked with children and families who were faced with loss, financial challenges, educational barriers, difficult family dynamics. I had to develop trust in these individuals. And I not only listened to their concerns, but I also had to identify their concerns. I witnessed the deficit there was within the foster homes and the need for foster parents who were willing to take on the challenges of providing care and compassion to children in need. And that is how I met my daughter, Destiny Beasley. She was 9 years old when I became her mother. Destiny, like many other children in the system, struggled academically, socially, and emotionally. Today, at age 15, Destiny has overcome many of her deficits, and that was contributed to love, trust, and consistency that I was blessed to give her. She's currently excelling in school, and she's a private at the Westover Young Marine Corps program and enjoys volunteering in the community. I couldn't be prouder of her. As a probation officer, I witnessed the impact of the criminal justice system has on the offenders and the disparities and the social injustices faced within our communities. Having access to community-based services and various mentor programs that engage our youth played a major role in reducing recidivism. I realized that many people lacked an understanding on how to navigate the criminal justice system. I found myself communicating that it was a key component to my role. I use evidence-based practices such as the type of supervision to give, allotting incentives for positive behavior, and for also abiding by probation conditions. And I was also motivating them to break their own patterns of self-destruction and promote healthy lifestyles. I also knew that there was important stakes involved, and I could be firm, but I could also be fair, holding each child accountable while embracing good attributes of their lives. Within my position at the Sex Offender Registry Board, I draw upon my previous experiences. While I look at each case, I assess the facts and I apply them to the standard, but I am always mindful of the registrant, showing them respect throughout the process and showing them empathy for their personal backgrounds and experiences. And I also consider all the positive changes they've made in their lives. If I am confirmed today to sit on the parole board, I can assure you that with all the skills I have learned from my professional and my personal life, I will utilize them on the board. I will listen. I will show empathy. I will be mindful of both the parolees' past and the potential for their future. I will look for ways to help them succeed, and I'll hold them accountable. And I will be cognizant of the community and public safety. My experience has made me a multi-dimensional candidate, of which I know will be a benefit to the parole board, and it will allow me to further service the public across the Commonwealth. Thank you again for your consideration in my nomination, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone who is here to speak in opposition to this nominee's appointment to the parole board? Hearing none, I declare the hearing closed. Open it up for questions. Councilor Ferrara?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you for the time that you afforded me to speak with me at length. And thank you for your service that you've done. I think your remarkable rise to where you are is very commendable. You're a hard worker, you have multiple degrees. I've heard nothing but good about you. You have great support from your home counselor, Counselor Hurley here, who speaks very highly of you. And you're going to have my support next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Kennedy?
Good afternoon. One comment I'm going to make is the last parole hearing we had about 100 people at it, ready to throw a lot of rocks because they didn't like the nominee's background. There's nobody here from that group, and I think their silence speaks volumes. I'm going to take that as an endorsement of your candidacy because they're just not here. Your background fits the background that they were working for as a social worker, as somebody who isn't a prosecutor, frankly, in terms of that. And I was very pleased by your nomination, given your background. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, touch on a couple of things. One has to do with the rate of parole. Do you think that the rate of parole right now in Commonwealth of Massachusetts is high enough?
So I do not have the answer to what the rate is.
I know you don't have the rate. Do you think enough people are getting parole? Rephrase it.
I think that people should have the opportunity to get paroled. I think that it is a concern if they're not getting paroled. but I also believe that they should have the opportunity to be paroled.
Because one of the things that, I don't think enough people, certainly not out of the House of Correction, tend to be less serious charges, but even in state prison, there's not, I don't think enough people get paroled. And one of the things that happens with parole hearings, especially hearings that involve more than one member, is they vote to parole people, which they get a positive parole rate because the person was voted parole, but then they put so many conditions on them that's impossible for them to get released before their sentence is completed. You follow me? If you send them back to do, all right, we're gonna vote to parole you, and you get paroled as soon as you finish this program, that program, and this program. If somebody's got a year or 2 years left in their sentence, they don't have time to do those programs. They wrap up, they don't bother, which everybody loses by because they're not under parole supervision anymore. There are a lot of issues with that. How do you feel about pardons and commutation?
I think that pardons and commutations are great, and I'm glad that they're part of the parole board. I'm glad that they're,
I'm not sure they're part of the system. I've been on the council for 11 years almost. We've had 1 commutation and 3 pardons at the end of the Patrick administration. You think that's anywhere near enough?
well, I wasn't on the parole board
I
when
understand.
this was going on, but I do understand your concerns that there should be more. And I have to, once sitting on the board, I certainly will share those same concerns with you, Counselor Kennedy.
You would agree with me that there are many people that are in the prisons right now that have earned at least a hearing before us on a commutation.
I do believe that there are individuals who've made strides to change their lives, to be able to have an opportunity to be on to be commutated. Yes.
So I think there's been 1 commutation in something around 25 to 30 years in that area somewhere. The lowest rate probably in the country, in liberal Massachusetts. Do you think that's right?
Well, it's certainly unfortunate, Counselor, and I can't speak to why it happened and why those issues, why that.
There's two, I can tell you, I can speak, that there's 2 reasons. The first one was Willie Horton, that shut down commutations and a lot of paroles, and the second one was Sinelli. I mean, it just completely dried up after that, whatever chance anybody had of getting. Parole rates dropped to almost 0 at that point, and I don't believe they've ever made it back to where they were or even close. And do we punish everybody for one person's sins? No. I hope that when you get on there, that you push to have those hearings. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of applications for thousands for pardons and hundreds for commutations that the parole board never looks at. Don't even give them a glance.
I can assure you that if I'm nominated to be placed on the parole board, that I will share those same concerns because I do believe in what you are saying, and I do believe that each individual deserves an opportunity to be re-entered into the community if based on their case situation, which will be looked at and assessed. And as I said, I have not been there. I don't know anything about the past, but moving forward, present,
Well, that
I
is the
share the
past.
same concern as you, Counselor.
That's the reality. That's the past. That in 25, 26 years, there's been 1 commutation. I cannot, it astounds me. I cannot believe that there are not more people deserving of at least the opportunity to try to get.
Counselor, I look forward to improvement.
You're an outstanding candidate. We talked on the phone for a long time.
Thank you, Counselor.
And I enjoyed the conversation. It made my car ride go by a lot faster. And I look forward to voting for you next week.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Counselor Anil?
Thank you very much. Councilor Kennedy alluded to the fact that the last parole hearing for the parole board, I think we had 100 people, give or take. And at that hearing, I made a commitment to the folks there that the next nominee has to have some social science background. I'm not going to vote for a police officer, retired police officer, former ADA, prosecutor. Enough is enough. So when I see your social science background, I'm impressed. And to me, I wasn't the only one who made that argument, but obviously there are other counselors as well. But obviously, the governor heard us, and that's why you're here today, so I'm happy about that. Now, you majored in sociology at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst,
Yes, I did.
and then after that, you got your master's in social work.
Yes, I did.
That's just what I want to hear.
Thank you.
You know, Counselor Kennedy mentioned commutations and pardon. Well, I've chaired a few commutations over my tenure. One was, I think it was 3 people. They were convicted of murder. Yeah, you heard it, murder. I chaired that here. These folks were in prison life with no chance of parole. Well, to make a long story short, they were set up by the FBI. We had that hearing, I chaired that hearing, and I led the fight. And those people had their sentences commuted. And we need more of those, if it warrants. I don't want just commutations for the sake of commutation, if it warrants it. I remember the days, pardons. You could be a young person. I'd like to know your thoughts. Larceny of a $50 sweater. And that's on your record. You did it when you were 20. You can't get a pardon for that? When I first started, we had a lot more pardons. That was like we had, I don't know, but a lot. And I don't know the answer. I don't know if it's the present parole board or the parole board, which I think is happening. Sometimes the parole board is recommending a pardon, but it doesn't come before us because the governor doesn't okay it. So it goes to the parole board, the advisory boards of pardons is the official name. Then it goes to the governor. If he's on board, then it comes to us. We haven't had any. So I'm not sure if it's the parole board or if it's the governor. I don't know that answer. Do you know whether or not the present parole board is granting pardons or recommending pardons?
Thank you, Counselor Ianella. I do not know who's handling the pardons. I don't sit on the parole board currently,
you don't.
so I don't know the ins about it. But I share those same concerns. That pardons are an important part of the community and rebuilding and allowing people to move forward in their lives and get good jobs and open up businesses. Those are all very important aspects. And if they have a history that follows them, we need to take a look at it. And as a parole board member, if I am nominated, I will do my very best to look into each and every case as an individual on an individual basis and try to come up with possible ways to allow the inmate or the individual who's out in the community to succeed. It's all about success. It's about promoting.
If you want to succeed.
Yes.
And to succeed, oftentimes you have failures.
Yes.
We all have failures, but with failures comes success. So can I get an assurance from you? Assume you're confirmed, and now you come back with a reappointment, and I ask you the question. We haven't had any pardons come before us, and since you've been, confirmed. How many of those, give me a sense of how many pardons that came before you that you voted for. I'm hoping we're going to see this woman here, if the circumstances are right, that we can count on you to vote to pardon people. Just, they're going to move on in their life. We all make mistakes. But can I get some assurances from you?
I assure you, I will do that. I will make sure that I look at every individual and find some way to get them to be looked at and to be examined, show them, listen to them, show empathy, and be able to work out what we could do as a board to get this individual's life moving forward. It's about moving forward. Nobody wants to stay stuck in the past. Nobody wants to have their issues follow them. But we do have to, under certain circumstances, make decisions that are not favorable for all. But I can assure you, I'm going to do my hardest to make sure.
I appreciate that. You said just now that let's move forward and let's not look at the past. Over the years, my feeling is because we've had way too many prosecutors, we've had too many police officers, all this on the parole board, which I've never been a fan of. I hear from a lot of lawyers and folks that when you have a parole hearing, I think what you just said about moving forward in the past, that these members of the parole board, they like to retry the case. You know, someone's been in jail for 5 years, been a model prisoner, been a model, did everything right, took this course, this program, this parole officer or this member, they retry the case. The guy's already been sentenced. Can I get assurance from you that you're not going to retry the case? The person's already been found guilty. The person already got a sentence. My understanding of your job, does this person's, the way he or she's been treated in prison, have they been a model prison? Have they done extraordinary things? Have they committed programs? Are they remorseful? Do they have some type of path in the community to go forward? Those are the folks that I think should get parole, not retrying the case. Because if you're going to retry the case, oh, forget it. No one's getting out. Your thoughts?
Thank you, Counselor Ianella. I can say that I'm not sure what the circumstances were that had the parole board retry.
It happens a lot.
And I'm not, again, I can't speak to what has happened. I truly can't. And I would be doing a disservice to anyone in any agency and myself to do that.
No, I don't want you to do that. I just want to make sure we can get some type of assurance that you're not going to be retrying the case. We can't forget what's already happened. We can't change that. I want to get assurances from you, but moving forward, if you're confirmed by this body, that you're not going to you're not going to retry the case all the time at these parole hearings.
I can assure you that I share those same concerns as you, and moving forward would look to do better at that. Definitely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You got a compelling story. You seem like a really decent person. I like your background. You know what? I think you're going to do a great job. I really, sometimes it's your gut. I don't know you, but I have that feeling that I'm going to be proud down the road that I voted for you. And your mother's here. What a wonderful day. You have all your friends here. You can count on me next week for a vote.
Thank you so much, Counselor Ianella.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for stepping up and applying. Who have you spoken to at the Parole Board?
As far as I spoke to Chairwoman, Glorianne, and that's it.
Okay, and what did you speak about and when did you speak?
Well, a couple times she's checking in on me to see how I'm doing and if I, was adjusting to the process of everything and speaking to everyone. And she was just checking in to say hello, introduce herself, and welcome me to the nomination.
But did you talk about any of the work, the substance of what you would be doing?
If I were to be nominated,
You have been nominated.
I'm sorry, if I were to be appointed, yes, rather, she did discuss some highlights about the parole board, very briefly, nothing long and detailed or strenuous or anything I had to take notes on. She was just checking in each time.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm just curious, and how do you know what the job is? What, is there a job description posted with it?
So there was a vacant position and I did
It's a
apply.
vacancy.
Yes, and so I did apply, and I submitted my resume. So, and there is the parole board's mission, there is the statute, mass.gov.
I know all that. That's not my question. You were asked to apply. You were specifically sought out. So
No,
what, is there a job description posted about what this job is? Because to Counselor Ianella's point, I want to make sure you understand what this job is. And he's asked you a lot of questions and the other counselors have asked you a lot of questions. And most of them have been big softballs, but there really haven't been any answers. So what is the job? Tell me what the job is.
so the reason there's been soft answers is because I'm not on the board and I have, and so,
But this is a job interview today.
yes, it is. Thank you. And thank you, Counselor Duff, for bringing that up. And it is, I do need to know the role of the parole board and what I would be doing as a parole board member. So I do understand, from what I'm understanding, from what I have read, is that I'm going to sit on a 7 board member seat with a chairwoman. And there are different backgrounds, some of defense attorneys, and they make decisions on life sentences. clemency, which is commutations and pardons.
Mhm.
And twice a week, we have life sentencing hearings. And once you have a DOC hearing, and it is with a 3-person member of the board that shows up to the DOC, and then House of Corrections is 1 member of the board that shows up. That you are given access to the individual's file. You have a certain amount of time to look through the file, and those are for the House of Correction hearings and for the DOC hearings. Also, for the life sentencings, you have a little bit more time. You sit together as a board, you make it's not a unanimous decision, but there has to be 4 votes out of the 7. And you talk and you discuss. The inmate can come with an attorney, they can come without an attorney. The main goal is to determine if this individual can go re-enter into the community and what supports and services can be given to them, as well as what their current situation is, how they've been when they've been in prison, what type of services and classes and educational classes that they did they take accountability, what does their report look like, how did they behave, how are they receiving the
I
sentence?
understand that. So when you go
Thank
to the DOC, you are meeting one-on-one with the person.
Yes,
And how are those cases assigned?
I'm not sure how those cases are assigned.
Okay. Because there's always been a very specific, logical way they've been assigned, which has been thrown out, starting with Chairman Tressler. And it is a complete waste of taxpayer money the way they're doing it now, but I'm not in charge. So that's I can only highlight it to the taxpayer that their money is being egregiously wasted, the way that the assignments are happening. When you talk to the chairwoman, did she give you any, because and everyone knows that we're very concerned about the complete lack of pardons and commutations. And in fact, that one person has been sitting in queue, and it should have already come to us, and it's not here. No one can understand why. The legal, the paradigms they work under seem to be thrown out the window. So no indication, no discussion at all about the pardon or the commutation process with Chairwoman Maroney.
The process in which, no, there was no
Okay, so it was just, how you doing? Nice to meet you. This
Here's
is-
what we do, yes.
Here's, so
Here-
she
here's-
did tell-
here's-
she
here's
did
what
give
we
you a
do.
job
We talked
description.
about-
She did tell you what
Yes,
to do.
we talked about what I would be doing.
I got you.
Yes.
That makes sense.
Yes.
So, how many lifer decisions have you read?
I have not read one, not one.
In preparation for this job interview, you haven't read any of the decisions that are published on the website?
I have read a few, yes, actually, articles published on a website. I've looked through and gazed through them, yes,
You've read none of the decision?
no, I've read no decisions.
Okay. I understand that your husband is a Springfield police officer.
Yes,
Would you recuse yourself from all the hearings in Springfield?
no,
You would not. Do you think that a parole board member should, if their spouse or significant other is an officer in the area that they live in?
I think that it's a case-by-case basis, Counselor Duff, because
No, wait, this is very specific, and I'm asking this is an important thing. Why would one set of rules apply to one person and not to the other?
I'm sorry, I don't understand your
Why
question.
would you have to abide by one set of rules and somebody else not abide by that set of rules?
In relation to,
To the question I just asked?
about recusing myself?
Yeah,
Because there is a case does not mean that my husband or my husband would have taken on that case. If he doesn't have any affiliation with the case, my job is not the same as his job. I have a different role. I've worked as a probation officer and he was a police officer, and we clearly did not discuss cases. We do not break confidentiality for any reason under whatsoever. We have 5 kids. We absolutely have no time for that. As well as it's not interesting to bring home your work.
That's fine.
so
I'm just asking you a question because the current chairwoman has not sat on over 1/3 of the lifer cases that she's been assigned because her husband is the acting police commissioner in Boston. And so she is not doing her job right now, at least 1/3 of it, and passing that work off to somebody else. What she's doing with that free time, I'm not sure because it doesn't seem to be reviewing commutations and pardons, but I could be wrong. So that's why I asked that question. Why does she have one set of rules and you would have a different set of rules? No disrespect to the officer. As you know, my brother-in-law was chief of a major American city, African-American, first African-American ever appointed to the position. I get it. I get what you do. You're a cop in a real city. You're not a cop. You're a real cop. But the Springfield police do have a reputation of opposing almost all life or parole people. And so this is an issue that will come up that you do need to think about. And I'm a little surprised you haven't thought about it. But it's a very, very real issue, and it's a major metropolitan city. And with real serious policing issues, you know, it's not Gloucester where I live. It's not Wenham. It's not Hamilton. It's not Milton. You know, these are major things, and there will be conflict. And even if it's not him, it could be somebody else. So you need to know how you will deal with that. As I told you when we spoke, I don't know why anyone would want this job. I don't know why anyone would want SOAR either, frankly. I mean, these are really hard jobs where the consequences, the personal consequences are tremendous and sometimes dangerous. So, but I am highly critical, as I told you, of this particular parole board. They have been, in my opinion, inept and incompetent. Not all of them, but many of them. When Mr. Tressler was in charge, he sat there when he was being appointed to the bench and told me in his 4 years, he had looked at one pardon application. Now, he went out to all kinds of events, and he went and got himself a certificate about drug rehab and stuff, and that's terrific. It's great to have certificates. It's a difference to have a license and to have done, you know, if you have a license, you've done 6,000 hours of time. You know, I've worked with addicts. I've worked probably 3,000 hours, and I'm not licensed. And I probably know more about it than most folks do. It's one of the reasons I ran for this job. So it's not, you know, where I come from and what I discussed with you is it's not good enough. Being a placeholder at the parole board is not good enough. You do have a degree in social work. You are not licensed. You've never pursued licensure. I don't know why. There could be a good reason why, and I'm sure there is a good reason why. But they're very different things. Right now, we have 7 attorneys working for the parole board, writing decisions. Under the chairman that we had before this administration came in, there were 2 attorneys. The decisions were being written by board members, and they were being issued under the timeline that they were supposed to be, 60 days, always. When they left, when the past administration left, and that past chairman left, they handed over a complete clean slate to the folks sitting there now. And it's a mess. And they have 3 times the staff. I mean, this is why I'm agitated. It's unconscionable to me that there are people sitting in prison for 10 months to a year waiting for a decision. And then they are told, if you will agree to an abbreviated decision, which is a paragraph, no guidelines, no saying this is what you did right, this is what you did wrong, here are the steps we want you to take, here are the courses we want you to take. The step down program, which we know works, which we had gotten to finally at a national standard, that's gone out the window right now. They are still waiting 5 months for an abbreviated decision. I mean, I honestly don't know why there hasn't been a class action lawsuit against the parole board and against the administration, against the state. And this is not an attack on you. This is incredible frustration of years of speaking about this. My job is to advocate for the citizens, and people who sit in jail and prison are citizens. And there are people who, many of them are mentally ill, some of them are addicts, and some of them just made really, really bad choices and bad decisions. And as one prisoner that I visited in Norfolk said to me, when does the punishment stop? And it seems to me that we have a parole board that doesn't want the punishment to stop. They want to reenact people's trials. And we hear this. The reason why it's been brought up by Council Kennedy is this is happening. If we didn't, I, who is not an attorney, would not be hearing this if it didn't happen over and over and over again. There seems to be a complete disconnect with this current board. There seems to be a complete disconnect of compassion in understanding of what their job is and creativity in sentencing. So I'll ask you, you worked for quite a while as a juvenile probation officer. The probation department in Massachusetts has done an astounding job in the last year, and maybe a little bit more, of taking a lot of the research that's been done, and instead of sending youthful offenders and reoffenders back into DYS, to come up with creative solutions for them, to keep them out of jail and prison, because the whole goal of this is to keep people out of jail and prison, right?
That's correct.
That's the goal. Can you give me an example of what you've done to keep a youth out of jail or prison?
So you're absolutely right. The probation department as a whole has made some strides and changes, and specifically within the juvenile court, I have had firsthand knowledge of that, as you said. The JDAI approach, the juvenile detention alternative lockup incentive program, was designed specifically to help to reduce recidivism by keeping kids in the most least restrictive environment. I have personal and I have experience with that as a probation officer, because I also have nieces and nephews in which have gone through the criminal justice system and has had to face times of being before the judge in a possible pretrial conditions violation. But the difference now is that each and every child has the chance to start, with graduated sanctions through evidence-based practices, which was established in 2014.
I understand that, and thank you, but I want a specific example of you implementing this.
So
I know what the law is, I know what the changes are.
Thank you. There are duly involved individuals that have come into the court, and I've had a dealing with one who was first on a CRA. Okay, well, first the parent comes in with concerns, right? I'll give him a name that is not real,
Yeah, sure.
for confidentiality, Joel, okay? Joel's mother came in and said to me, I said to the clerk's office, I need to speak with somebody. My child is being unruly in school and at home. The probation officer, such as myself, will come and meet with the parent and say, what's going on with Joelle, and hear and listen to her concerns. Sit down one-on-one, nobody around, in our office, doors closed. And she explains to me her distress. She's a parent in distress with a child that's out all night long, dibble-dabbling, maybe gang affiliated, could potentially just be skipping school just because he's got some academic delays. Well, we offer the individual, the mother, for the child to come in under a CRA, child requiring assistance, which is the old CHINS,
Right.
but it's new and more reformed. And I would offer her a CRA and say, well, this is a civil matter. This is not a delinquency. This is not anything that's going to cause it to be reflected on the child's criminal record. This is what we can do, be assigned to a probation officer. It may be myself, it may be somebody else, but I give her the communication and answer any questions she may have. I tell her what to expect. Your child will come back here with you on a set date for court. Your child will be introduced to an attorney because they have a right to legal counsel, even in this matter. Somebody
Right.
could represent them that doesn't speak, that allow them to speak, and they don't have to speak on their own behalf. I also give them the instruction that we can help the child. This is a beginning of help that can be brought forward with the incorporation of resources and community-based services. So I introduce her to the CRA, give her a date and a time which is convenient for her circumstances, and tell her to bring the child in. If I'm assigned to that case, I meet Joel on the first court date, introduce myself as his probation officer, and ask him what he thinks the concerns are. I listen to him, not with the parent in the room, but with the child before me. And I say, well, Joel, what do you think they're presenting concerns? Why are you here before the court? And he says, and I said, before the probation officer, because you're not before the court yet. He'll say his piece. He'll probably have a lot to deny, a lot to say in his defense, rightfully so. He's a child, and he probably doesn't understand the severity of what he is doing. So I explain to him while he's here. I show his empathy and say to him, I understand this is the way you're thinking, but this is a safety issue, and I'll tell you why. So these conversations are very lengthy between me and the juvenile before they even get into the courtroom. My role was not just to say, you're here in court, because it looks scary to a child. It makes them freeze, and it makes them tighten up and get defensive already. So it's to de-escalate and answer any questions or concerns, and allow them to share their issues, and allow them to share what they don't like, and allow them to be who they want to be in that room with me.
Okay, so this is a great theoretical situation that you've given me. And I'm really looking for something more concrete. So then I know that you know, as a juvenile probation officer, you know, would be in court before the judge asking for different sentences or recommendations, recommending to the judge different things. What percentage of your cases did you ask for detention for the youth?
Well, Counselor, I cannot give you a
Can
percentage.
you give me a ballpark, give me a rough estimate? I mean, you've got to have some idea what your record is.
No, I actually don't look at my record or my stats, but I can tell you that it dropped significantly based on the JDAI approach. The fact that we were looking at individuals from a different standpoint, and the fact that we did do graduated sanctions, and we had administrative hearings in which that helped them to correct what was going on before we even got to a piece of paper to write violation.
Okay, so before, okay, so there was definitely, so you're a fan of the changes.
Oh, absolutely.
law.
Our numbers dropped more than half.
Well, yes.
We barely got kids in lockup now.
Dropped. I'm just wondering if your numbers did, but that's easy enough to find out.
Yes, they did.
So how often, and again, I would ask you for percentage, but a ballpark, would you come up with, how often would you say to the judge, okay, here we've got Joelle who's done these things, and mom's upset and dad's upset, and we've got all these issues, and he or she gets it, doesn't get it, whatever. How often would you say to the judge, I think this kid should go to DYS, or here is another solution that I've come up with that I'd like you to look at? Give me an idea. How often would you do that? Because what I'm trying to find out is, what is your creative thinking? And I'm asking you that, and I'm not, you're giving me a lot of facts about things, which I appreciate and I understand, but you're not answering my questions.
So I do my job, and creative thinking is always important, but I also have to ensure that the child is safe, and that the public is also safe. I have to look at the resources that are available to our kids, and
Correct.
Sometimes there is a lack of resources.
Okay.
And sometimes our children do need to be held accountable, which is more than just role clarification and me giving them a verbal discipline, a verbal warning. It sometimes does require you to have to go before the judge once you've exhausted all of your options. Creative thinking, it comes from the child. It doesn't always come from probation. I can say to them, what do you think could help you to be successful? What can I do?
Yeah,
So-
listen, Mrs. HoSang, I understand that, but these are children. Their brains are not fully formed. We know this. We have the science for this. There is a reason they're sitting in front of you. I am sorry. I strongly disagree with that. We as adults, I never say, and I've said it in the last hearing, it does not absolve someone of committing a crime or wrongdoing. Their age, their gender, their anything, it doesn't absolve them of it. They need to be responsible, but we are the adults. We are the ones charged and well compensated to come up with creative solutions. And it may not be something that is in your wheelhouse, may be in your wheelhouse later, may never be in your wheelhouse. It may be something that you're really not interested in, and that's okay. I just want to know, because I believe from working with a lot of addicts and from working with a lot of criminals that we, the grown-ups, need to use our brains and come up with some creative solutions. And you are going to be charged, if you become a member of this parole board, with an incredible responsibility of giving somebody their freedom and then setting benchmarks that they can meet so they succeed, as you said, because that's the goal. The goal is success. My goal is that they become taxpayers, and we're not paying $55,000 a year to incarcerate them. Instead, they can get to work and build some self-respect and self-esteem back, and maybe contribute to society, because it all builds on itself. And I know that you know that. But what this board is doing now is not that. It is the diametrical opposite of that. And it has been going on for at least 5.5 years. And it is absolutely, frankly, criminal. The parole board, the parole department, not the board. I don't really, I don't know if I would recognize anyone from that board. They've come in sometimes, but I don't think if I'd known them, if I met them in the hall. But I do hear frequently from employees of the agency who tell me that it is an incredibly hostile environment, that they are very concerned about retaliation all the time. They are fearful to speak up. They are fearful of the way that this is being run right now. And that is not a good thing. That's, Sorb had that a while ago in the last administration. That didn't turn out very well for that governor. And so I am very, very concerned about the fact that we have men and women sitting in prison in the middle of a global pandemic who had a hearing and is sitting there surrounded in a high-risk place without getting a decision. When there are 7 lawyers, that's their only job is to write them. I can't do the math in my head why this is happening, because it doesn't make any sense. Somebody is not doing their job. Somebody is not holding people to accountability. Somebody is deciding, I like you better than the next person, so you're going to get this assignment and that person's going to get that assignment. And that is wrong. I don't have a horse in the race. I don't, these aren't my friends. These aren't people I go out to supper with. These aren't people I know if I pass them in the hallway. But I know right from wrong. Like you, your mother raised you right. She raised you with faith and knowing the difference between right and wrong. And if you get this job, you are going into a maelstrom of people telling you things, and a lot of it will not be true. And will you be able to navigate through it? I mean, it is a very, very challenging place. And that's why I said I don't know why. There's a whole lot of reasons why I don't know why anyone would want this job. But it's just a poorly run agency right now. I mean, there's just no other way of saying it. And so, I know you have some experience, and that's terrific. I also know other people, I've heard about other people who applied for this job who have far more experience. And I am not the governor. I don't get to make the decision. But I do know that this is a very political place, this agency. And it's a lie for anyone in this room to say it's not, because it is. And that is neither here nor there for you personally. But there is a great deal of concern with attorneys out there that in your part of the state that have seen you at work, that don't feel you are open-minded, that feel you are extremely punitive. Even with these new guidelines, they don't feel that the kids are getting a fair shake. They feel that kids are being unduly punished. And so if this has happened to juveniles, what's going to happen to the grown-ups? Because what's happening to the grown-ups right now is pretty damn bad. And it's wrong. And nobody cares. Because you know what the truth of the matter is in this state? Nobody cares about drug addicts and nobody cares about people in prison. And everyone in this building can say, I want more drug rehab beds and I want this and that. And they will keep saying it from here to kingdom come. And you know what? Marilyn Devaney says we'll never get them. Because the truth of the matter is they don't want to pay for them and they don't care. They don't care. They put you in that category and they'll put you in a cage and they'll lock you up and they want you to show up to pee in a cup. And that's what they do. And they stigmatize you for your life. And I guess my passion comes from the fact that you would have a chance to change the very trajectory of somebody's life in not just giving them their freedom, but giving them the direction that they need. And you will have to be so bold and so brave to a board that is so broken right now. Honestly, it really, I'm not saying this for my health, and certainly not for my youth. It's broken, and it's severely broken. We are rated we went from being one of the top rated to one of the very worst systems in the country in 5 years. We get an F on almost every single report card on this. I read these things. I follow this. This is a true passion of mine. So, I'm not gonna beat you up and keep asking you questions because I could go on, if I want to go on into that mode, I can do it, and there's no point to it. But I have to be very honest and very clear that it's not working well. And I'm not sure you've done enough homework to be sitting in this seat right now, to be honest. You say things, but you're not answering questions to me. And, and that happens. And but it's something that, our job is to listen and to really decipher what is happening and what people are saying. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you.
So when did you first get notified that there was an opening on the parole board?
Maybe 4 months ago.
Okay. When did you first apply?
Maybe a week after that.
Before you knew there was a parole opening, had you ever been to a parole hearing?
No,
After you filed your application, did you appear and say, I better go down and look at a couple of hearings to see what they're all about?
no.
Well, how do you know you're even going to like the job?
Well, because I have faith in myself and what I've done over the years. I know that I've worked with juveniles who've been detained. I've worked with adults and during CMP cases.
I understand all that, but you haven't been in the parole board.
Not with parole.
So
I have had other.
without going to a parole hearing or a few of them, how do you know what you even do at the parole board?
Leading up to today, I have been listening to hearings. I have listened. I haven't been present at a hearing.
Well, you have a good education, there's no doubt about it. But let me ask you, you took a job as a juvenile probation officer.
Correct.
You were in that job for 6 years.
Yes.
Why would you leave that job?
Because I was offered an opportunity to grow in my career and work more closely with sex offenders.
And you thought that was something you were interested in?
Absolutely.
Where you were hired in that job, I mean, less than a year when you applied for you were there about 8 months when you applied for the parole board.
I was not in control of the vacancy on the parole board.
No, that's not my question. You told me you left probation because of this job and sex offenders and you wanted to work with them and all of that. But yet, 8 months later, you apply for a different job.
So yes, I did. I
Why?
applied. Because again, it's still in my passion to work for people. And I found that the parole board would also benefit with my experiences and my personal life to be on the parole board as well.
But you didn't know anything about the parole board.
I did know about the parole board in terms of what the parole board does, in terms of the fact that there are parolees that, are seeking to be re-entered. Yes, I was known, but I don't know the specifics ins and out, such as all the concerns that are being told right now.
Okay, so when I look at your history, you got a great job as a probation officer. If you stayed, you'd probably be a chief probation, assistant chief, and then a chief. Something got you out of there, okay, I can see the sex registry board. But then you're not there 8 months and it's like, I got to move on to something else. I don't know whether that bodes well for my vote.
So Counselor Juvenile, I can say that with having a criminal justice background does veer me back to being a probation officer with supervision and allowing individuals to go back into the community. I am about community, just like
You were in that position and you left it.
well, there's a difference in between the tasks, the job, performance on a sex offender registry board versus a parole board member. They have different functions. I cannot let an individual out.
Why?
I did know that. Yes, I did.
You were asked by Counselor Duff about your husband being a police officer and whether you would recuse yourself in cases involving the Springfield Police Department. You said no.
I then said it's a case-by-case basis. I cannot recuse myself from
What
everyone.
case, if they're all involving Springfield Police Department, what would make the difference in you recuse yourself?
If I had known anybody or my husband on that case, I would just recuse myself from the case. I have no affiliation with anybody or don't know anybody by their name, officer, so I would have no reason to recuse myself because I've been working in that community.
What does it mean to you when you say, I should recuse myself? Why do you recuse yourself?
Because it's a conflict. It's a conflict of interest. It doesn't give the inmate their rights.
Okay, so I'm an inmate and I'm going up for the parole board. I'm from Springfield and the Springfield PD locked me up and charged me and I got convicted. And I say, oh, I'm going before Hearing Officer HoSang. Her husband's a Springfield police officer. If I'm an inmate in the institution, what do you think I'm going to think about that?
You're going to think that there was some sort of conspiracy between the both of us that got the individual that got himself there. That's what you would.
No, I mean, if I'm going to go before you on the parole board.
You're going to think that because my husband works on the police department, that I'm not going to agree with the vote to let him be released.
I agree with you 110%. Of course, the inmate's going to think that way. Any person with any kind of a mind, not knowing you, would think that. That's not the reason you recuse yourself, though. Whether you and your husband talk about cases, or whether you talk about them, or whether somebody thinks, an inmate thinks that you're a prejudice because your husband's a police officer on that department. That is not the reason people recuse themselves. You know that?
I'm listening.
Huh?
I'm listening.
Do you know that, I said?
That's one of the reasons that they don't, yes, yes.
Okay. But what's another reason why you'd recuse yourself?
If you have any involvement with the case.
Another one. Okay, here's the thing. I won't beat you up on it too much. You recuse yourself, not that there's anything untoward about you and your husband in the Springfield Police Department. You recuse yourself because of the perception, the mere perception that there might be, or that somebody might think there is. That's why you recuse yourself. And so you agreed with me, if I'm an inmate and I see you and I know your husband on the department and I'm here, I don't think I got a chance in hell like getting a favorable decision on it. Now, that may be erroneous. You may be the fairest person on that parole board, but the perception that the inmate has is enough for you to say, I'm not going to sit on this case because my husband's on the department, even though I've had nothing to do with it, and my husband had nothing to do with this case, and we've never talked about it. I'm going to recuse myself so that nobody thinks there might be something. You understand?
I understand.
That's why judges recuse themselves. Not that they've done anything wrong, but the perception, the mere perception, I think the rule says, is enough for a judge to say, I don't want people to even have a thought about it. So I would suggest you would have to recuse yourself on every case from the Springfield Police. Don't you think?
I would think so.
Well, are you gonna?
Well, I will.
It's a very simple question. It deserves a yes or no answer. Are you gonna recuse yourself when the Springfield PD is involved in the inmate coming before you?
Yes,
We have your word 100%.
I will recuse myself. Yes.
We have your word
Yes.
100%.
Yes.
You talked about, as a PO, something about graduated sanctions.
Yes.
What is that?
That's giving the juvenile the opportunity to correct any or do better in their current conditions before they have to go before the judge. So we have administrative hearings if there's issues going on with the orders of probation. We also do have incentives for them if they're doing well. We also do effective discipline, a role
This is where
sorting.
you said graduated sanctions.
Yes.
Sanctions a punishment, right? When you
To-
sanction somebody, you kind of punish them, don't you?
Well, that may be a word that's looked at negatively, but we explain to the individual what the process is. We explain, I didn't
What
give
do
it the name of
sanctions mean to you?
sanctions.
What do
I
sanctions
didn't
mean
give
to
it the
you?
name of a sanction. It's
What
a
does it
hearing.
mean,
It's
sanctions?
it's a hearing. It's something that you would do and go before it on a certain situation.
I'm not a English
I don't-
scholar, but I know enough about sanctions because I've been sanctioned a lot in my life. Okay? And it's a nice way of saying, I'm gonna punish you. Isn't it?
I will
I'm
not,
gonna give you this sanction. You're gonna have to stay alcohol free. You're gonna have to go to AA. You're gonna have to do this, do this, do this. Those are sanctions. Right?
giving the individual their conditions to follow. So graduated
Well,
sanctions.
graduated sanctions in the court system, as I understand it, is it's much like a sentencing judge when they look at somebody's record. Oh, he's had prior, so I'm going to give him more time.
Except that we don't operate that way in the juvenile court. No,
You don't.
we give them opportunities before we bring them before the judge.
And
the
if you
work
bring
is-
them before the judge and they haven't done the things you wanted, that one graduated sanction, you punish them, ask for more punishment?
There's no punishment. I would not call it punishment. I would call it accountability.
Well, when
And I
somebody in probation doesn't carry out one of the orders of probation, they're violated, right?
Not all the time. They are not violated all the time.
When they are violated, they go before a judge, don't they?
In some cases, they might go before the assistant chief probation officer,
Okay.
not the judge.
And the assistant chief probation officer has the power to find a violation of probation and sentence them?
Not sentence them, but they have the power, or they have the authority to say, we're going to move this to a judge because it looks like we're not coming up with a
So do you-
plan of
so do
success.
you as a probation officer, don't you?
I'm sorry?
You have a right as a probation officer to go before a judge if somebody has not, has violated the terms.
Yes, I do. I do have the right to go before a judge.
And you do that.
And cases, I do that,
Yeah.
yes.
And do you ask for more sanctions if they haven't complied with the sanctions that were given to them?
I'm sorry, you mean ask for more conditions? I modify the conditions. I don't ask for more on top of what's already not working.
Have you ever had people on probation who were ordered to not use drugs?
We've had screens, drug and alcohol testing.
No, my question is, have you had people on probation that were ordered by a judge? And the judge is the only one that can make probation orders, right?
Well, they.
You can't do it and the chief can't
Correct.
do it, right?
They do assign and affirm the conditions. Yes, we can offer recommendation and they can agree or deny. They're the only ones that are able to do that.
Right. So I'm sure you've had people on probation that the judge has ordered to remain drug and alcohol free.
Yes,
And have you had those probationers, some of them violate those conditions and use drugs or alcohol?
some of them have, yes.
And did you violate them and bring them before a judge?
It depends on the circumstances.
No, did you ever bring anybody,
I have before, yes.
okay, on drugs?
If they've used drugs or alcohol and we've exhausted all resources to help them, I have brought them before the judge.
And have you asked for jail time?
Have I asked for
Commitment?
commitments to DYS? Yes, I have. On certain occasions, I have.
With people that are drug addicted?
I don't know if they were drug addicted, but they had violated to a point where there was no other options available. It was at the best interest of the child at that time.
What's the meaning of addiction in your mind?
It's an unsolvable, there's no answer. It's something that affects people's lives differently. There's no solids, it's a dependence on
Okay, you
on
gotta
drug.
listen to my question. You're gonna be on the parole board. You gotta listen to questions, okay?
Okay.
Tell me what an addiction is.
Addiction is somebody who is dependent on a drug. They need the drug.
Okay. You've had people that are addicted to heroin.
I have not had people addicted to heroin. I have not had a probationer that I was aware of that was addicted to heroin.
Okay. Well, those cases you asked the judge for commitment for violation of drug or alcohol, what were the drugs and the substance?
But while there were other contributing factors, it was either marijuana that I was aware of.
Mhm.
That was it.
So you've asked a judge to commit somebody because they used marijuana.
No, not solely based on just using marijuana. There were other contributing factors that led to that decision.
What?
There have been, that the child, again, was either at risk of hurting himself or others, that the child had no placement options. It could have been the child was unable to be in school. There was no family supports. There was no parent or caregiver willing to continue to work with that child. There was no DCF placements available, and we needed to, keep that child safe. There's multiple reasons to ask for a commitment in the best interest of the child.
A lot of those things you just mentioned aren't the fault of the probationer.
Correct, but we need to look at the best interest of the probationer. We can't leave the probationer out on the street. We can't say, well, because you are a marijuana smoker and we don't want to violate you because you smoke marijuana. That's not helpful either. That doesn't solve the problem.
Marijuana is addictive,
Of course, marijuana can be addictive.
physically addictive.
It can be addictive in any way depending on the person's
You know the
decomposition.
difference in physical and mental?
Some people use marijuana
Now,
for,
you know the difference between physical addiction and mental addiction.
yes.
Is marijuana physically addictive? Your opinion?
It's a question I don't have an answer to. I don't have an answer to that.
Did you vote for the marijuana question?
To be
Legalized?
legalized? No, I did not vote for marijuana to be legal.
Well, there's no study that I've ever read or ever heard of that showed that marijuana was addictive in the sense of a drug like heroin. Mentally, you can get addicted to it after a while, but no physical addiction. So you're sitting on the parole board and somebody is out on parole and they use marijuana and their parole officer violates, goes before the board. That's all that happened here. Nothing else. How does parole hearing officer HoSang vote?
Well, I have to know the circumstances
I
of the
just told
case.
you them.
It-
The guy's
well,
on
I'd
parole.
ask the
He's done
individual-
nothing wrong at all, except he got positive for marijuana in his system.
Well, I'm looking for resources for him. I want to know what he's done to treat it. I want to talk to him. I don't want to just make a decision just like that without having any
The parole
conversation.
officer's going to file for a revoke them, and it's going to go before your board. You're going to be sitting there. Are you voting to send him back to the cages that he's going to go to? Because he's got marijuana in his system?
It's very unlikely that I would if it's just marijuana.
Well,
We know that
that's what I said.
individuals come with so many
Look,
different
You
complications.
got to listen to me. That's what I said.
That's what you said, and the answer is
Nothing
no.
else but marijuana.
It's unlikely that I will do that.
What do you mean unlikely?
It's very unlikely. If it's just marijuana, the answer is no. I will not.
You're not just telling me that.
No, I'm not just telling you that. As long as you're not just telling me that it's just marijuana.
That's all it is.
Okay,
Look, I'm saying it not because it never happened. It
absolutely.
happens all the time.
Yes, it does. I'm sure.
Why do you think that there's so many people in prison? Why do you think there's so many minorities in prison? Because they use something like marijuana, they get arrested for it in the old days. Now they go out from prison, they get out of prison and they might use marijuana or even alcohol. And boom, they're back into the cages because the parole board did that. And if you're going to do that, I'm not voting for you. Because I think it's ridiculous. There's other ways to deal with that.
Absolutely.
So you're sitting on the parole board and come before you was a fellow charged with murder. He was convicted of second-degree murder and given by a judge eligibility for parole at 15 years. He's a model inmate. Come before the parole board. That's it. How do you vote?
Well, according to what I understand about the parole board, that's not the only thing we look at. It's not based off you just being a model inmate.
What else do they look at?
They look at what your outside supports are, the accountability, how the victims are affected, what, and to what extent the community was affected. It's not the only thing we can
Okay,
consider.
so the guy's done his time. 15 years, let's say he's done. Perfect inmate, comes before you. And you're gonna deny him parole because the victims don't want him to get out?
That's not necessarily, that's not why, no.
Why then?
It really does depend, Counselor Juvenile. I can't say.
So let's assume he doesn't have a support system.
And that's like,
Then we gotta leave him in a cage for the rest of his life until he gets the goddamn system, right?
there's other alternatives to that. That's just one.
Not in jail, there isn't.
In the community, there's other alternatives.
He's not out yet. You haven't voted yet. you're making excuses to keep them in. Right?
No, I would not make excuses
Doesn't
to
have a
keep him
support
out.
system. I can't let him out. Back to yourself for another 10 years and come back. We'll see what support system you got. You're never gonna have a support system. Been in jail. Victims don't want him to get out. Well, they can't let him out. The victims don't want him to get out. Right? That's what you're telling me.
No, I'm telling you that those are the things. You asked me the question, what other reasons would you deny their parole? And I told you various reasons that it could be denied. I didn't say this is contingent on one reason, but if there are more positive ways to allow the individual to enter into the community, that is what the aim is, moving forward,
Okay.
not allowing them.
Realistic is that?
I'm sorry?
How realistic is that?
Well,
If I'm sentenced to jail for 15 years, I'm not gonna have probably any outside help. My family may be dead by the time I get out of prison, 15 years. And you want them to have all these things, that's what Counselor Kennedy was talking about. The roadblocks that they put in the way of somebody getting out are such that you never get out. And it's why we've got the place stuffed with people, because that parole board isn't letting them out. Am I wrong?
I don't know what the parole board has done. I wasn't there to witness that. But I can tell you that that's a systematic flaws everywhere. And we need to be as a,
Well, since I've been here, I don't think there's been one second-degree lifer that's got parole yet. How is that possible?
I'm not sure, Counsel.
I'm going to tell you, because of people on the parole board. That's why. And most of them are black and brown. And they don't get out as much as white people. How come you didn't get your license for the social work?
That wasn't the road when I became a social worker, I found more of an interest in the juvenile court. And at that point, I didn't need to get my licensure to be a juvenile probation officer.
Somebody said there was a letter sent complaining that you had been heavy-handed with people at the sex registry or probation.
Juvenile, and that is absolutely not true.
I haven't read the letter. I'll read it for next week. Have you read it?
I've heard about it.
Well, how
I've
do you-
heard that,
wait a minute.
that there's
How
a
do you say
letter
it's
there.
not true if you haven't read it?
Well, I've heard that there's a letter in opposition to my appointment. So, I mean, that's the extent of the letter.
So you don't know what's in the letter?
No, not entire. I mean, should I know what's in the letter?
Where's the letter? Do we have it?
was an email.
Do we have the email?
That's in my home.
So did this nominee read it?
I didn't have her.
Okay, okay.
And, but for the record, I asked, you know this, has she ever heard it on any matter? And the answer was, so this is somebody who wrote a letter based upon hearsay, credible or not. And,
We get a lot of that though, but
I just, you just take a break.
you're the chair. Of course we can take a break. No, fine, take a walk. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
All right. Mr. Secretary,
Ready?
nomination. Say, we are back in session.
Thank you. Yes, I do. So, have you read the letter?
I did not read the letter. Was I
Okay.
supposed?
So it says the criticism of you is that it says that your instinct is to lock people up rather than help them succeed in the community.
Second chance. I got up to can't read it, Bob.
Would you please? The knock on you was that you almost always recommended commitment or detention of the youths she supervised, despite mass probation stated position to seek alternatives. Is that true?
That is absolutely not true.
How many times have you recommended incarceration on a parole violation, a probation violation? What?
I
It's on.
do not know.
More than once?
Yes, more than once.
More than 5 times?
Yes, more than 5
More than 10 times?
in the 5-6 years. Yes, more than 10 times.
So the recommendation is to ask you a couple of these questions, which I'll ask. And we've talked about it a little bit before. The graduated response approach in the juvenile court.
Yes,
You know what that is?
yes.
What is it?
That's alongside of the JDAI approach. It's to least restrictive, it's an alternative lockup. You give the child least restrictive environment. It also involves incentives. It involves supervision in which, according to the OAS risk assessment tool, it allows us to speak to the juvenile and get an understanding of their family and their history. And then there's a scoring sheet, which and based on the answers, that allows us to make a risk level, low, high, or medium, low, moderate, or medium.
Okay. What percentage approximately of cases did you recommend detention to the court on an individual?
I don't have, I can't answer the percentage. It was
Well, I'm not holding you to it, just an estimate.
out of a year of cases, which maybe I had 100 cases, maybe 10 cases out of the 100.
Have you ever recommended requested pretrial detention because a child welfare placement was not available?
Well, if it's in the best interest of the child, yes.
No,
Yes, I have.
your answer is yes.
Yes, I have. Yes, I have.
Have you been to the youth service board inside of it? The detention facility?
Yes, I have.
Not a place that I'd want to go. I've been there, but I wouldn't want to be sent there. Would you? Can be a pretty rough place. Right?
Well, yes, it's a place that no child would want to be, including myself.
So
But
why
there are
would
benefits to
you
being-
put somebody in there just because there was not a placement available?
There's a benefit to being there. And
Really?
it's, and
What
in
is that?
many cases, if the Department of Children and Families do not have a placement for that child, and if that child does not have any supports to go home to, or no caregiver comes to pick the child up, nobody wants to house the child, I wish I could take the child, but I can't. So I send, the child has to temporarily, it's not permanent, be there for their own safety, because I don't want any child sleeping outside on a bench.
You'd rather have them in the detention center?
I'd rather have them be safe. I'd rather
You think
have,
they're safe in the detention center?
in some cases they are, yes,
Some cases are not.
that's right.
You think people are safe prison? Inmates?
Prisons are there to help rehabilitate as well. I think there are some instances where things, circumstances can arise and it will be unsafe for them.
Have you ever been to the state prison?
Yes, I have.
You've been inside of it?
Yes, I have.
In my view, having been in state prison a lot of times in my life, both as a state policeman and lawyer, there is no safety in state prison. In fact, there's nowhere to hide and you want to hide getting. The inmates don't want to get you, they'll get you. I would disagree with you that it's a safe place. My concern is that if you put people into the detention center, especially young people, first of all, what they experience in there probably leads them to commit more crime. In addition to that, case I had many years ago where they put the kid in the detention center, taking a bicycle away from another kid. And he was raped in there. He got sent there and the recommendation was from a probation officer and a judge agreed. That kid would never be the same the rest of his life because of a bicycle. You say to me, yeah, I think I'll put a kid in there or I'll leave him out on the street. I say to you, no. If I'm a kid, I'd rather be on the street and having a fight and live and put up with what I put up in there. So I don't get your thinking that that's a good thing. And if that's what you're thinking, then it's going to be a good thing for parolees that come up before you. Well, you got no social network, so let's put you back in the cage. State prison. Right? That's what I'm getting from what you're saying to me.
I've had a situation where I had a juvenile who I had to commit to the Department of Youth Services because when he was in the streets, he was on his way to being killed. There's gang affiliations all around. There are many kids who are not forced to be in school and they have the ability to leave during the day and go out into parks and areas that we don't even hear of. And there's danger. When I commit a kid to the Department of Youth Services, it's because I know the danger of being outside. Do I think they're just going to sleep on a bench outside? No, I do not. I've saved many juveniles' lives. They've told me. I've had witnesses to that, and I wish there were more letters about the success stories on my caseload, on mine. I can only speak personally for mine. I don't do things cookie cutter, and just because I wasn't here to give a creative idea doesn't mean that that's not how I think when I come into contact with an individual who is stressed out. They don't have what some other kids have. So yes, DYS becomes their saving grace. And they don't just go in there and let the kids run wild. There's plenty of efficient staff members who can protect that child and be a mentor to that child and provide education to that child and give the child an opportunity to excel in areas that they were not able to. And after the commitment is done, there's DYS workers that still follow the child into independent living. So it's not a bad thing, with all due respect. I do understand that things do happen and you can expect them to because it is life. But I do not agree that DYS versus sleeping outside in a danger risk area, high risk area is appropriate for a child who can be saved.
Well, it sounds, the way you put it, sounds like we maybe should put all of our kids into detention center with the help they get in there. I don't see it that way when they go in there, and I don't see what they get. That helps them when they get out that much. And if you're worried about gang members getting somebody on the street, they can get them just as easily in the institution, in the detention center. Right? There's gang members in there.
There are gang members in there, but I'm saying the possibilities of allowing that child to excel is also available in DYS as it is out in the streets. It really does depend. A child needs supports. They need a support system.
in my view, not in that detention center. The only people that should be in there is if they commit serious crimes and they can't be released. You got to hold them for the safety of the public or them. Otherwise, you wouldn't want your son in there, and I wouldn't want my daughters in there. Did you ever file a 51A on a parent or guardian for refusing to appear in court and or refusing to take a youth home?
Yes.
What's a 51A?
51A is a report of abuse or neglect that is filed to the Department of Children and Families by a non-mandated or mandated reporter.
Why would you file one of those? Because the parent doesn't report.
Well, I'm a mandated reporter. And if
When no crimes,
there's a child that has no place to go, there's a child that has no place to go.
mandated reporter is to report on something that happened. Child.
Abuse or neglect.
And
Yes.
the fact that the parent doesn't show up recorded, in your opinion, sufficient grounds to get a.
If there's no there's no parent present, no caregiver, no aunt, no uncle, nobody for the child, I have a duty to protect the child for the best interest of the child. I cannot let that child walk out the door and he gets hit by a car.
Doesn't the state have all kinds of foster parents?
I'm one of them, yes.
Well, can't you get a temporary placement in a foster care home?
That's why you follow with Department of Children and Families. They are the foster care department. And unfortunately, in some cases, they do not have beds for our kids. They do not have beds for them.
Nowhere in the Springfield area, there's beds for these kids.
Counselor, those are my same concerns. It's happened.
Well, I worked for a halfway house on boat called the Dexter House. About 15 young boys in there, most. And we'd get somebody every month that would put in temporarily, rather than having them put into the detention. According to what you say, unless I got it wrong, parent doesn't show up or some loved one doesn't show up for the child, goes into the.
No, I did not say that. I said that we
Where
have
does
to
he go?
file a 51A.
Where does he go?
He could go to the Department of Children and Families, which is not a detention. It's a placement. It's a foster home. If there are no foster home beds, the Department of DCF, the Department of Children and Families has to figure out a plan for that child. They are a child protection agency. They have to find a solution.
Why wouldn't you
other than
find out why
DYS.
the mother was?
Of course I would. After exhausting all those options, the mother might say, I'm not willing.
Did you ever call a youth who was not adjudicated and was in pretrial hearing a quote drug deal?
Never.
Did you ever use a GPS monitor as a way to ensure a youth's safety?
I don't order GPS as the judge does.
You and I've been in courts for 43 years as a lawyer. You and I both know that that statement you made is a misrepresentation.
I'm talking about me. I don't order GPSs. The judge orders GPS.
But you asked.
I don't ask for GPSs.
Never asked for
I'm
GPS.
not in favor of
You've
GPSs.
never asked for GPS?
I have never asked for a GPS.
Okay.
And might I also add, just because you said never, I've said never, because I understand what flashes back into
I'll
my
take
mind.
that as mean a high majority of times, okay?
Right, in the case that the child has lockup versus a GPS, that would be a time where I would ask. I'd rather the child be home with their family on a GPS.
What do you think causes the racially disparate issues in our criminal justice? Why are more black and brown people getting jail?
I don't have an answer.
Did you read
I
the
do.
report of the Harvard study on racism?
No.
Judge Gans commissioned it.
I've heard of it.
Go through all of these incarcerations and the amount of people percentage-wise. Clearly, the whole system falls heavy on minorities. They said there's one answer to that. Racism. Right?
Racism definitely plays a major role in the numbers of Black and brown people incarcerated. I can agree.
And what are you going to do about the racial bias in our corrections?
Well, I'm certainly not going to allow it to happen in front of my face as a woman of color who has brothers, who has uncles.
I think we have three
So-
minority members on the parole board now, is it 3 or 4? We don't get people involved. We don't get people commuted. How do we know that you're going to go out there and do something about it?
Well, I can tell you what, I will, because I don't think it's right. And I do find that racism plays a major role in our communities and why our young people are being charged versus other children in other areas, Black and brown kids.
Yeah, but you're going into a different area now. You're going into an area where people are in prison.
Mhm.
And you know what parole means?
It means supervision, being out in the community and being supervised.
And they call it the parole board, right?
Yes, they do call a part of
I
parole.
think they maybe
parole board.
are going to change the name of that. To the denied board. Because I hear stories about at hearings, you've heard it mentioned here that the case of 20 years ago is brought up again. Ask questions. Where were you? What was your participation in it? Who went here? Who went there? And is that what you did? Do you admit to that? That's what they ask. And if you say no, guess what? You're not getting parole. So there is this condition that they want. They want you to admit sitting there that you agree with me, there are people convicted and sent to our prison that are innocent.
Yes,
The estimate is anywhere between 15, maybe 20%. We hear about them when somebody's released after 20 years of DNA testing, right? That person spent 20 years in jail and went before the parole board probably 2 or 3 times and was denied because they didn't admit it. So what's parole board member HoSang going to do when somebody says, I didn't do it? I'm up for parole. Done all the programs, never a problem. Everything is great. Except for that one thing. Because that's the only thing you have to decide. What do you do?
I'd parole them.
Sure.
I'd parole them. Because they're positive changes, the things they have done, the strides they made, I would expect to change them as an individual.
But let's say they're a member of 15%. I'll tell you right now, you're going to be in the minority on the parole board. I can't understand. We make somebody, we want somebody to take responsibility, but they did that when they were at court. or they got convicted, but they didn't do the crime. So most of the time, that those don't do the crime don't get out. Case in Cambridge many years ago of a family had a daycare center and allegedly kids. Mother, son, daughter. Jail. Mother and daughter get out. Got out. About 14. Son didn't use parole. Did 20 years. Then it was shown and proved kids were lying. It's lying. Judge finally stepped in, granted motion trial. He could have been out if he said, I did it. Because he didn't. Stayed in, and there are many people in there. Say, look, I didn't do it. I mean, that's going to be a question that's asked. You say, I'm gonna vote parole. I'd be very interested to go after there a while. Call me up and tell me I've had 3 votes, or 4 votes, or 5 votes. Released. Taken. Said he didn't do it. And why would it mean anything at that point in time? Do you think after 20 years, what would it matter whether you said you did it or you didn't?
Are you asking me a question, Counselor?
Yeah.
Accountability
Accountability to who?
to the victim, the victims, the public.
So I don't, does that mean you're gonna ask for that accountability?
In other ways, you can be accountable.
You know, I grew up Catholic. And every Saturday I was made to go to the confessional booth. The priest wanted me to make admissions to all these things. I said I did. Of course, we all lied. We never told the priest really well. But this need to have somebody confess is troubling to me. He's done his time. He was a good inmate. He doesn't show any signs of recidivism. So what? He answered that. He may be one of the 15% that is telling you the truth. I'll guarantee you that there are a lot of people that didn't do it, that went in and said they did so they could get the parole. But they lied to you. Not you, but the parole board. The parole board fell for it. Well, he's admitting it. He's admitting it because he knows if he doesn't, he's not getting out. So I hope you're going to be strong on those issues.
I will, Counselor. You'll see.
I don't forget,
Neither do I.
because if you've been 6 years there and you come back here, we're going to have a record on you of what you did at that parole. And if I find that, people that said they didn't do it, didn't get your vote, don't bother coming back 6 years. The record of what you're going to do. Look, the whole point is to get people out of jail. Get them out. We hold people for life. We're the only major country on earth that does that. Everybody else has usually a 25-year max on a murder case. Because usually after 25 years in those hellholes, the kick is all gone out of you. You're a shallow person. Hollow, I should say. You've been abused half your life in the place. You get out. You're 20 if you commit the crime. Get out when you're 45. It's a tough life from then on out. We keep people in until they're 70, 80, 90. Someday they're going to print out the amount of money we spend on medical care for inmates. New hearts, new knees, new hips. People are walking around without insurance. They can't get any of that in the institutions. We have to provide that. Millions and millions of dollars are spent to keep 70 and 80-year-olds alive. Keep them in jail, keep them in a cage. We got more people in a cage than any other country that's ever existed on earth. And you're gonna be either helping that figure to stay, or you're gonna do something about it when you go up there. But you gotta be strong, because you're gonna have other people putting pressure on you. You're gonna be strong enough to do that?
I'm going to be strong. Yes.
Okay, that's all. Thank you for your time. Thanks,
Thank you,
Madam
Counselor.
Chairman.
Counselor DiPaolo?
Thank you.
Always last, always
I love spending
last.
time with you, Marilyn, that's why.
You're not gonna change your stripes. I'll be last always.
But you're close.
Last but not
Counselor
forgotten.
DiPaolo and I have travel of.
Well, it's been said the last shall be first, right?
Amen.
Thank you.
Yes.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I care deeply about the parole board, and as you can hear, a lot of my colleagues do as well. So I'm not going to belabor points that have been made, but I am going to go through the issues that matter to me. It's long overdue to have someone with a DCF or social work background on the parole board. And that's great. And before I get into my questions, I wanted to ask something to pick up on your conversation with Counselor Juvenile. You mentioned how there are cases where DCF lacks beds for kids, right?
Yes.
Have you ever heard the expression lobby kids? Lobby kids, LOBBY,
In the, yes.
as a what do you understand it to mean, lobby kids?
That they sit in the DCF hallways,
Mhm.
waiting for a placement, and there's an abundance of them
Sometimes all day, right?
all day.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not in some kind of daycare facility or enrichment something or other. They're in the hallway or the lobby of DCF offices. And the Commonwealth allows that to happen to our most vulnerable children, right? Thank you for doing the work of working with our juveniles. Clemency is important. And like I said, I'm going to try not to hit on points that have already been made. I want to ask if you agree with the governor's guidelines on clemency and particularly commutation. We've heard a little about that. The governor's guidelines say that commutation is an extraordinary remedy and an integral part of the correctional process, and provide that commutations are intended to serve as a strong motivation for confined persons to utilize available resources for self-development and self-improvement, and as an incentive for them to become law-abiding citizens and to return to society. Do you think that's an admirable goal?
Yes.
And so what has been brought up is that there's only been 2 commutation hearings in the last 6 years, yet hundreds of applications. And in many cases, those applications, those petitioners haven't even been responded to whether they're even going to get a hearing a year out. To me, that's not just. To me, that's a broken system. To me, that's a parole board that's abdicating its responsibilities. To me, when the governor's guidelines say that, what I read into it is that we're trying to give hope to these prisoners. That if you're doing however long you're doing, and there's no light at the end of the tunnel, what are you going to do with yourself in there? What are you going to do with yourself? Right? Because you know, and I know, and we all know that there's inmates who make incredible effort to improve themselves, right? 2 commutation hearings in 6 years out of hundreds of applications. Yes.
Only one. There's four pardons, 1 commutation.
Was it Mr. Kuntz and also Mr. Allen had a recent hearing? Right. What, hasn't Mr. Allen had a hearing?
Here before us, we've only had.
I apologize. The parole board that you may be sitting on, right? Because we can't call a hearing based on a petition. The parole board has only held 2 hearings, commutation hearings in the last 6 years. Hundreds of applications. The governor's written. That's the goal. that it's going to be a strong motivation for confined persons to utilize available resources. I don't see how that motivates anyone. I don't see how 2 and 6 years out of hundreds of applications makes anyone feel that there's any reason to improve their life. I hate to say that. What do you think about that?
I agree. I share your concerns. I do believe if there's, commutations, and it's only been 2 from my understanding, that we need to do better.
My understanding is that some aren't even reviewed by some of the board members, some of the applications. It's my understanding from folks who would know. What I hope is that the parole board changes. And I hope that we have parole board members who are going to take the initiative, for lack of a better expression, to rattle the cage. These injustices are embarrassing for the Commonwealth. They're embarrassing. As was mentioned, we have one of the lowest rates in the country. Are you familiar with the case of Mr. Thomas Kuntz?
I've read about it.
Yeah, so he, as you know, he did have a commutation hearing, the first under this administration. His petition was approved unanimously by the parole board. The governor hasn't yet acted on it. He's served 29 years now. For, quite frankly, the underlying conviction, I don't think was first-degree murder, but that's a separate issue. 29 years. So according to the most recent state figures available from the Commonwealth, that's about $2 million we'd spend to lock someone up for 30 years. So I'm a year off. Although it is actually, he might have passed 30 because it was 29 when he had his hearing. Councilor Kennedy and I had a chance to meet with him and his attorney. I mean, the unanimous vote on this parole board that won't even hold hearings says it all. Says it all. And there's been no action. It's been sitting there. It's easy to let it sit because no one cares, right? No one really cares about someone who is labeled a convict or whatever. As far as pardons go, we know that, strike that. How do criminal records affect someone's efforts to gain employment and to re-enter into the community the way we want them to?
Yeah, I mean, most employers now need a criminal record. They need to see what your background is.
Right. And that makes sense to me as an employer.
Yes.
Now, again, back to the governor's guidelines, not on commutation now, but on pardons, the governor's guidelines, right? Clemency in the form of a pardon functions as forgiveness of an offense to remove the barriers that are sometimes associated with a criminal record, thereby facilitating the reintegration of petitioner into his or her community. I agree. That's great. And yet, also in the guidelines, we have requirements that a petitioner must provide written documentation. This is someone who's out in our community, has a criminal record. If they want to seek a pardon, and as the guidelines say, in order to remove the barrier associated with a criminal record so that he or she can reintegrate, they need to provide written documentation from an employer that their criminal record is preventing them from hiring them. You need to have an employer say, well, I'm going to hire you, but I'm concerned about the criminal record. Oh, could you write a letter for me then to the parole board? Doesn't seem realistic to me. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's definitely concerning. How can one get somewhere without the other? Like, you need to, there's got to be a better way.
Yeah.
There's got to be a better way.
And it's one of these things that we've heard about today where we're setting people up to fail,
Right.
right? We're not really giving them opportunity. We're giving lip service to opportunity. So again, what I really hope is that the parole board, as it turns over, is going to speak up about it, right? And not just kind of, after work, complain about it to whoever. Oh, I can't do anything about it. I'm really, the complacency and would you be willing to speak up in favor of some of the policies I'm referring to? In other words, looking carefully at the guidelines about requiring an employer to provide written documentation.
I've always been one to speak up.
Mhm.
That's how I operated. That's how I became a social worker.
Mhm.
That's how I became a probation officer.
We
I've
need a
always
strong
spoken.
voice. We need a
I've
strong
always
voice.
spoken up.
Um, I just have a few more issues I want to hit on, but I'm going to be referring to a couple documents, and I'd like to bring them to your attention in case you're not familiar with them. I know the Harvard study was mentioned on racial disparities. The state auditor recently released an audit of the parole board. Are you familiar with that?
No.
So the state auditor, in auditing the parole board, found that the Massachusetts Parole Board did not conduct required risk and needs assessments within mandated timeframes. Again, justice deferred is justice denied, in my opinion. They also found that the Massachusetts Parole Board could not provide documentation to substantiate that parolees received all required reentry forms. So this is incompetence beyond, or a willful effort to not have data available. After today, and if you're approved for the parole board, will you carefully review that audit, and will you make that a discussion point within the parole board? Because I'm not aware. There may be actions being taken about it, but I'm not familiar with them. Councilor Duff, is there anything going on since that audit? Right. Didn't go as deep as it could.
The auditor's office is very limited in its
Indeed.
funds and what it's able to audit.
What-
But they did, to their credit, they did look at this and what they found was not very good for the parole board.
To Councilor Duff's point, the fact that the auditor's office even bothered to point their spotlight on the parole board says something, right? So again, I guess I'm repeating the same question. Does that disturb you? And will you speak up about it?
It does disturb me, and I will speak up about it.
The Massachusetts Bar Association, and I'm not going to go through it because a lot of the points I've already made. The Massachusetts Bar Association recently released a report of its clemency task force. And it raises a lot of the issues that have been discussed today around commutation and pardons. So I definitely encourage you to check out the Mass Bar Clemency Task Force report.
I have.
So around the Harvard study specifically, and I won't regurgitate, but we have sentencing disparities that are clear. We've controlled for context, and we know for sure that with the same conviction and the same underlying context, Black and Latinos get longer sentences. And it happens for a million reasons, but the thing that's pertinent to your job potentially as a parole board is those disparities are, to me, manifestly unjust. If it's taken this long for the population to care about it, fine, at least we can act on it. But I'm thinking about, when I think about your process on the parole board, the Massachusetts Bar Association has suggested that the guidelines should acknowledge that racial disparities in sentencing exist, and clemency is a tool that should be utilized to address sentences that are overly harsh, unfair, disproportionate to similarly situated offenses and defendants, or inconsistent with a just result based on the circumstances. What do you think of that statement? Do you think that the parole board should acknowledge racial disparities in sentencing exist, and that should be clemency should be a tool to address that issue?
I absolutely think it needs to be addressed. I think that it's great that the parole board would look into that. That is.
Well, I'm not sure they have looked into it. It's the Mass Bar Association asking them to.
Don't, but I can say that is great.
Yeah.
It needs to happen.
I hope so. And I'm sure the Mass Bar is pretty frustrated because it was like 25 years ago that they asked to provide diversity of professional background on the parole board, and we haven't seen that. Again, I'm excited to have a DCF, someone with a DCF background
Thank you, Council.
before me. That means the petitioners before you. You see the underlying cases. You're aware from these conversations that certain communities tend to get wrapped up in the criminal system more than others for a variety of reasons. Is that a mitigating factor for you? Does that tip your yes vote?
It's a concern to me, and I will address it, and
Yeah.
I will look to I'm not saying that that is going to be the case in every situation.
Of course not.
Has to do with race, but I do take that into consideration, yes.
My fear is we had this moment last year where all of a sudden there's this public consciousness around these issues. We have this Harvard study come out that's it's ubiquitous in the bar community, and I'm concerned that it's going to get swept under the rug, and that we talk to people who kind of throw their hands up and say, well, this systemic thing's happening. Now we're aware of it. And that's the end of the story, and that's not the end of the story. So again, based on what you're saying, I would hope that as a parole board member, that you're raising that you're raising the specter of the past, right? Because we're looking forward, but we have to look forward informed by the past. We have the highest disparity between Latinos and white incarceration in the country of our 50 states. We have the 14th highest disparity between Black and white incarceration in the country. I've worked with CRAs as well, as an educator and as an attorney. This was asked in like a general way. I'm wondering like specifically what, and it doesn't have to be one that you've recommended, what's kind of like a mainstream condition that might be placed on a child in a particular situation? Could you give me a hypothetical?
Obey school rules,
Mhm.
home rules,
Mhm.
curfew, engage in home therapy or any type of therapeutic services.
Mhm.
Those are all mainstream.
And what would happen if a child comes back and has been found to violate those conditions?
Well, the child is met with by myself because I would typically be meeting with the child outside of the courthouse.
Mhm.
I make myself very visible in the community, or have been,
Mhm.
and ask the child, to express their concerns around meeting their conditions of the CRA. I want to hear their voice. They have a right to speak up. I know we're adults, but we also give them the opportunity to have a voice.
A big challenge I've found in working with kids is establishing trust, especially when it's anything remotely related to the courts, even with an administrator in their school. Do you feel that you were able to, do you think that kids were being straight up with you? Do you think kids were really revealing everything? Do you think kids had things they wanted to keep hidden?
Not at the beginning.
Yeah.
And as I stated earlier, you have to build that relationship with them.
Mhm. In your experience, do a lot of the kids coming forward as CRAs have childhood trauma and a history of childhood trauma?
Yes, they do.
Are you aware that childhood trauma exacerbates the pace of brain development and to the point where, a teenager might be at the executive functioning level of like an elementary student?
I am aware of that.
What concerns me in specific cases, and I'm not in Springfield, what concerns me in specific cases I've dealt with and specific children I've dealt with is that the conditions placed on them, like a curfew that they have to meet for the 6 weeks before their next hearing, or obeying certain school rules. If I know how their brain is functioning, I can tell you that they're not going to, I can tell you in 6 weeks they're going to come back and they haven't done it. I can guarantee that in many. And I know that in Massachusetts, statute says that the care, custody, and discipline of children brought before the court shall approximate as nearly as possible that which they should receive from their parents, and that as far as practicable, they shall be treated not as criminals, but as children in need of aid, encouragement, and guidance. I've heard from you today that I think you agree with that.
I do.
Talking about, do you know what I mean when I say group home?
Yes.
Have you been to a group home?
Yes.
What are those like?
Chaotic.
And just for anyone watching who doesn't know, what is a group home?
So
Chaotic's a great description, by the way, so you're off to a good start. What is a group home?
group homes are typically run by the Department of Children and Families or an agency like CHD or, and what they do is they house children with behavioral issues or children who have been placed out of the home for care and protection purposes. And children who need stabilization. So I won't use the word, so they place them all together.
Yeah.
And they may be rooming with another child in some circumstances.
Yeah.
And they are run by resident assistant, they would call them like counselors. And they would have a structure in their day and have times to eat and times to play and times to have groups and times to leave off campus. And they also get medication. There's a nurse on site. There is therapists on site. In most cases there are. And they're there to have it's called wraparound, an all-around service for the kid, 24 hours a day. That's a group home.
And God bless the people who work there. But not all of them are good environments for the kids, in my experience. Not all, right? I've worked in therapeutic high schools. I've had children who are placed into group homes that are over an hour away from their school. And I applaud the efforts to not disrupt their education, continuity in education and so forth. When a 17-year-old who's experienced trauma, maybe there's a bad home life, whatever the case is, they find themselves in a situation they don't want to be in. They're in a group home. When a 17-year-old gets woken up extra early and put on a van to ride over an hour, commuting to a high school that he doesn't feel welcome at, I can tell you what he or she is going to do. They're going to act out in school. The problem is there's been conditions placed on them that they can't act out in school. What do you think about that?
Well, school conditions have since been removed. Disturbing school assembly. We don't violate kids for school issues. It just hasn't been effective over the years, and that's part of the news approach. And I think that it was a setup to have a child who was already missing their families, who had already been taken out of their environment, placed in a new environment, and then expected to behave 100%. That is just unreasonable. It's unrealistic.
It's not what a parent would expect, probably.
Right. And so for that fact, I share the same concern as you. That is the longest rides to get to school. I've had some of the same concerns, brought it up bunches of times. And, you look forward to motivating and encouraging that child that it's going to end and that they will be back into their environment soon.
Right. But a child has a hard time believing that, right?
Of course they will.
A child has a hard time imagining themselves past tomorrow. And a lot of the kids, unfortunately, sadly, the ones I've worked with, they don't even really see themselves living very long. And they'll say that. Have you ever had occasion to know of a child who runs away from a group home?
Very often.
Have you ever had experience with a child who's run away from a group home and told you or told someone that the reason they did it is because they weren't safe there and they weren't sure how to get out and no one was listening to them, their concerns?
Yes, sir.
And when they run away from that group home, do they ever come before the court and be held accountable for that action of running away?
In terms of safety, yes, they have been had to be accountable to the court for safety purposes.
And so does that ever escalate the, how to phrase it? Does that ever escalate the sanctions that they might be receiving?
No, I wouldn't. In my experience, it didn't escalate the sanctions. We just need to find appropriate placement for the child so that they weren't running. So if that means talking to grandma or another caregiver, somebody in their family who clearly sees that it's not working for the child to be in that placement, take them back home. Let's try again.
Yeah. I've seen kids face consequences for that. So I can speak to my personal experience watching that happen multiple times. So you're going to put conditions potentially on parolees now, adult parolees. So in 2018, almost 90% of cases where parole was revoked based on violating conditions of release, 90% of them were for what some people call technical violation. By technical violations, I understand that to mean not a crime, but a behavior that was put on them for some reason. Perhaps in wisdom, perhaps in folly. What do you think about that?
Well, technical violations, we had them in a world of probation, not just in parole. They can be very important at times, and other times we utilize them for, to let them know what could potentially happen if you continue to violate in this manner.
Right, right.
It could lead to them obtaining charges, and that's not what we're looking for.
Mhm.
So we want to solve the problem that's causing the technical violation,
Right.
come to a solution.
Right. And there's egregious cases out there that have been reported of like a glass of wine or like absurd things, absurd. And I encourage you to look into that. It's absurd. It's disgraceful. Another thing that the commutation task force, the clemency task force, the Mass Bar Association put together talked about was survivors of sexual abuse and domestic abuse. 84% of women incarcerated in Massachusetts have a background as a survivor of sexual or domestic violence, 84%. And we know that could talk about children with childhood trauma. I could talk about survivors of domestic abuse. We know that incarceration exacerbates and re-traumatizes people. I think that someone who's gone through the system and seen their freedom taken away, I think that being before the parole board is going to re-traumatize them in a lot of ways. Do you think that those hearings should be public?
I do think that, if it's up to the petitioner.
Currently, people serving life sentences have public recorded parole hearings and are allowed legal representation. But most of the rest of the population does not have public hearing and actually doesn't have counsel at the hearing. Do you think that's right? On the access or availability of mental health treatment, mental health counseling in our Department of Corrections.
I do not have any understanding or know about the access of treatment for the inmates. No, I do not.
One of the stories that I'm at a loss as to why it's not in the public discourse, and I guess again it's because we just don't care about prisoners, is that Donald Trump's Department of Justice, and I say that because Donald Trump's Department of Justice released a report asserting that the Massachusetts Department of Corrections routinely violates prisoners' Eighth Amendment constitutional rights by denying mental health treatment, by inappropriately using solitary confinement, claiming it's an emergency measure that needs to be taken. Cases of folks with mental health issues being punished for their mental health issues and not treated for them. We even have a parolee who was approved by the parole board and he stayed in prison for decades because the board said, we don't trust you to be out there with your mental health conditions and we don't know where to put you. So hell, we'll spend 70 grand a year to keep you in jail. This is the parole board that exists. So I ask these questions and I get on my soapbox because it's been too long. And I don't think it's been taken seriously. This particular seat's been open for too long. Our board is overworked. We heard some members of the board are barely even doing their job, from Councilor Duff in particular. I thank you for your time. I sincerely hope that if you are seated on the parole board, that we have a voice that's going to speak up for some of these injustices. And I realize it's a big job with a big responsibility. And I know that people's freedom is going to be in your hands. And I know that we have systemic issues we need to address, and we cannot address them if the people who have the authority to address them are going to let it slide. Let it slide. Go along to get along. Ease in for a year. I would love to see some voice and advocacy on that parole board. I thank you for your time. I have a social worker presented to the council.
Thank you, Council.
All right, Counselor Devaney.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to respectfully correct some things that were said here today. First of all, it was Governor Weld who stopped the pardons and commutations. He wanted to be hard on crime. Well, he was hard on crime with the wrong people, and so every governor followed suit with his policy. And our former executive secretary, George, told me that when he was on the council, they voted at least 40 pardons every week. And that goes back even to Councilor Iannella 35 years ago, and that's about the time probably it stopped. The other thing I wanted to say was about whether this nominee could vote on the police department. My late husband was a Watertown firefighter, and I was on the city council. The law, the conflict of interest law, prohibits me from voting anything on the fire department. And I even questioned an attorney. It doesn't put money in our pocket for me to vote for more firefighters that we need in Watertown. I couldn't vote on anything. I would leave the chamber when the fire department budget came up. So I want to say that it is absolutely Massachusetts conflict of interest that you have to adhere to. Someone will pick you up on it if you don't. The other thing is that Councilor Juvenile talked about. I know that case very well. I was here. And when that daycare came up, it was going to be sent to the acting Governor Swift. If she voted yes, it would come to the council. If she voted no, it was dead. I was getting all these people saying how this was so unfair. Well, I believe in my heart the mother and the daughter were innocent, but Tukey, son, absolutely. A friend of ours who happened to be a firefighter, very close friend, he said to me, Marilyn, if it comes up, don't let him out. His 3-year-old daughter went to that daycare center and she became frightened. She didn't want to go anymore. She cried. She came home with other little girls' panties, inside out, and blood in her panties. They went to court and they testified against Tukey. So I know firsthand, he cried. And you know what? That girl is in her 30s and she is beautiful, beautiful girl. And she has never had a relationship because of what that man did to her when she was 3 years old. You don't get over that. They destroy lives. And that's what happened to her. So I just want to put that on the record. I lived it. I know it. He was our friend. And, and she's a forensic specialist of some kind in California. She's been engaged a couple of times and broke it off. And I'll tell you, if you saw her, she could be a movie star. And she has never got through that. As far as as far as juveniles, I did volunteer for almost a year. Volunteered as a counselor on probation in court. And it was the greatest experience for me because in my little world, you just stereotype juveniles. And I found out there's such another side. And I would meet them individually and I would get to know them, go to lunch, and then they would learn to trust me. And I heard the stories of a young teenage girl who was locked in her bedroom at night. Her mother was a prostitute and she would go out at night. I know those stories. I'm not going to go into all of them, but I know. And so for me, it was a great experience. And that's why I say here over and over, juvenile court is the most important. It is the most important court. This is where they're formed and whatever has happened to them, sexual abuse or whatever, that's where we have to stop and help these people. Now, going on to that, going on to the, first of all, I do want to ask you, and I'm going to go on, just to get it out, this letter, okay? And Council Juvenile did cover some, I'm not going to go over those. But there is a juvenile detention alternative initiative. And it says here that you declined to participate in this self-reflective aspect of it. And that was a bad indicator for someone going on the parole board, because this was to get into the disparity of racial and cultural. So tell me why you declined.
First of all, I did not decline.
Okay, see, this is what we've got to.
Right.
Okay. you did-
That is incorrect.
Okay.
I did not decline. In fact, I was there and I was part of several of the group discussions. The only time I was not present was when they were facilitating the red. Okay, I was not a facilitator of the red, but I was present in every other discussion that had to do with race, to do with disproportionate offending and arrests within our community. I was
Okay.
very interested, engaged, and involved. I also was a cultural proficiency champion at the time, as I stated, or someone, one of my witnesses stated in their testimony. And I was also advocating for for all the public at that time in terms of coming into the courthouse and people with disabilities and people with race and gender issues and wanting to have a more open courthouse. So I was also facilitating and I was running that as the juvenile probation for Hampden County. So I was the only one. So I was also very busy with the same kind of ideas and participating. The only thing I did not do is be a facilitator.
Well, let me tell you, because you were only given 4 days, which is unbelievable, that's really hard. I don't know how you got witnesses and got your people here, but you did. You had 4 business days. And we met and you accommodated me and I appreciate that. So if I had got this letter when we had met for all that time, I would have gone through all of it and not brought it up now. So I don't believe everything I read. I don't believe everything I hear on TV, radio. So I'm just, I just want to cover this so that you have an opportunity to speak on it.
Thank you.
Oh, and by the way, I did want to say that Governor Swift voted no. And so it never came before us. So I forgot to say the rest of the story. Okay, so anyway, the other thing is now, the sex offender registry, I'm going to get off the letter. I have my own opinion. I mean, we just had a pedophile priest that was let go after, 25 years or whatever. I think he should have stayed in for life, but that's my opinion. Do you think, I mean, and you can't even count the hundreds of boys that he molested, ruined their lives. One of them lives in Newton. Until this day, he has tried to burn the house down. He's tried to kill himself. He's tried to kill his parents. And he was 4 to 10 years old when he sexually abused that child. And he's 35 now, never have a life. So I want to ask you, do you think that they can be rehabilitated, these type of sexual offenders?
I do think that everybody deserves a second chance. I do believe that.
See, I don't believe they can be rehabilitated. Now, there's another side of this that bothers me. There are people on the sexual offenders that, this young couple have gone together and they've been going together a year. Now, all of a sudden, she cries rape. He's on a sexual offender for the rest of his life. He's on that registry. It's so wrong. So that's the thing, I don't know how to balance. That's the thing. But I disagree with you on those pedophile priests and everything. No, I don't believe that they can be. No, sorry. But anyway, okay, or I don't know whether it was all involved, but did you recommend graduated sanctions?
Absolutely.
Okay. And all right, what process would you use to decide to file a violation of probation?
After I've exhausted all other options, after I've given the child the evidence-based practices that we were the newly ones that were adopted in 2014 through the OAS assessment risk tool. After all of the has been exhausted, after reaching out to the family and finding ways to further support the child, you then bring the child before the court when there is nothing, when there's no other option left.
Now, I don't know these definitions, so you're going to have to explain it to us. Zero curfew. Okay, now do you believe in it? And what is it?
So a zero curfew is when you basically say to a child besides school and any other major obligations that the parent might come up with, it could be therapy, it could be, you know, they have a job. Other than that, you're to stay in the house or you're to stay in front of your house. That's a zero curfew.
Okay, home confinement.
Home confinement typically has to do with the GPS, where the child is inside of the home, and because of the GPS, you can go maybe as far as your front porch, but you cannot leave the residence.
So do you think that's effective as a tool to monitor a youth while he or she is on probation?
While I think it's certainly better than lockup, I think that it can be effective in some ways, and in other ways, I don't think it's effective.
Okay, now I'm going to read this just as it is, okay, this question. How did you use your role to satisfy the mandate of Mass General Law 119, Section 53, that, quote, the care, custody, and discipline of the children brought before the court shall approximate as nearly as possible that which they should receive from their parents, and that, as far as practicable, they shall be treated not as criminals, but as children in need of aid, encouragement, and guidance.
From what I'm hearing, your question is how did I satisfy that
All right,
chapter?
just read 11.
That's one of the questions that
Okay,
was
so
raised by that attorney, who doesn't know you, never dealt with you.
No,
And-
we know her very well. We know who she is, Patty Garen. We know who that is.
based on that.
She's been coming here for
What I,
years.
what I think this is saying is not treating children as criminals. And children who are in need of aid and encouragement and guidance, that we shouldn't look at them as criminals. Well, first of all, I agree with that. Okay, I don't call any child a criminal, never have, and I never will.
Okay, okay, now this is something accusing you, okay? How often did you discuss substantive private matters with youth or families in the hallway in the courthouse?
My biggest concern was getting the child into the courtroom and making sure they did not miss their court hearing.
So what percentage of your juvenile cases did you ask the court for detention?
I have no idea the percentage.
Well, I mean, 1, 2, 5.
As I explained, if I had 100 cases, I'd probably say 10
Yeah.
out of the 100.
Right. So, yeah, we really have covered all of the questions really that have said, I will accept anything that anyone brings, but I know we had the most wonderful person ever on the parole board. And this woman brought in people when she first was appointed to oppose her. And there was no one that was more suited to be on the parole board. She was a victim witness advocate, but she lived in a very dangerous area in the western part of the state. And she lived in public housing where there were rapes and murders and everything. And she had a brother that was serving a life sentence. There was no one that understood both sides as she did. And she spoke Spanish. But we got rid of her. We didn't need her, right? Shame, a shame. But I'm just saying that, there are, your life experience brings a lot to the parole board. And she did have those life experiences. And let me get off on the life experience. I first want to really praise you for what you've done as a mother.
Thank you.
Being, being a foster parent with children, and you adopted that 9-year-old child.
Thank you.
I mean, you gave her a life. Right, yeah, so I do want to say that, that's remarkable. So, let me just say, long-term residential treatment, how does that fit in?
And with respects to, sorry, Counselor, I don't understand your question.
Yeah, well, they are, they're talking about the least restrictive environment. And so what can that be? Because they're saying that recidivism is rising when you are more restrictive. Okay, can you tell me your opinion on that?
So the less, what we found, and based on the studies and the scientific studies, is that the least contact you had with a juvenile, the better. And that is why we implemented the evidence-based practices and the OAS assessment skill tool, and we did all the praise and incentives for them, and verbal praise, and all those things to promote the child to continue to do well. Now, least restrictive has everything to do with lockup versus a placement outside of lockup. Finding other ways. And it all, I agree with it. I think that every child should be in a setting that is least restrictive, and that they don't have to be behind bars just because they broke the law, though, or just because they had a violation of probation. That is not the answer.
Okay, I just want to tell you, the woman who wrote this has a class. She's a lawyer, but she has a class of students that are advocates for people, in prison advocates. And her student was with Sinelli. If you saw it on TV, the hearing, and she was saying, you're doing a good job. So this is who, so she's representing, that source. So, I want to give you the chance to answer all this. They say you don't believe in second chances. Okay, so tell us about that. And that several people thought it would be helpful to ask these questions because she doesn't know you. She's never seen you. She said that. But, these are questions that I think we've really covered them all. You talked about 51A that the counselor had asked you about.
Yeah.
And the court for detention and the violation of probation. Now, the DYS, that's a little hazy to me. You did answer it. Now, I'm not a big fan of the family and children. I really am not, because I've seen so much tragedy that, when you think of Bella in the bag, remember that one? And she let her boyfriend kill her, and she saw her, and they put her in a bag, and they brought her and threw her in the water. And she told all her neighbors that she was away on vacation or whatever. And you know what bothers me, and I can't change it? She walked. She walked, and she saw her child being molested, being murdered, and she walked. And that's why, or how about they went to a home, and a 7-year-old boy was the weight of a year-old child, and they closed the book. They closed the book on Bella. That's what about. Now, what is your experience with that?
As a social worker personally, because I'm not going to, defend the Department of Children and Families. I'm not here to do that or deny them. I'm just here to say, as a social worker under my caseload, that has never once happened. I was very attentive to my families. I was there routinely, regularly. I was prepared to deal with any circumstances that arise, and I had no problem doing so. And no children ever, there was never any such situation that happened under my watch like that.
Right. So why did you leave probation as a probation officer and go to sex offender registry board member?
Right. So, being, having to work with different types of individuals, I found to be interested in sex offenders. And I wanted to expand on my understanding and how to work with them and how to help them to rehabilitate and be another person on the board that has a voice to potentially give people a second chance, that has the potential to think things through and capacity of which, they deserve. just another way to continue to excel in my personal and professional career.
Now, this respite worker, is that a state job? What is that? I didn't understand what that was.
So it's a crisis stabilization unit run by Behavioral Health Network, which is a network that specializes in mental health and addiction. I was specifically on the respite unit, which is a unit that has about 15 beds for adults who are in immediate crisis and are allowed the opportunity to be on the crisis unit for a certain amount of days. It's a temporary stay in which you give treatments and groups and they're on a structured daily plan. They're on medication adherent. They get their medications right. There's a nurse on site. And it's like a group, a facilitation a way to allow the individual a break and then go back out into the community and carry on with their day-to-day lives.
I just want to let the councils know that we covered this letter, all questions that we did. So I just want that to be said. Tell me, how did someone give you the, say, gee, you'd be good in the parole board? Did anyone direct you to, gee, there's an opening, why don't you apply? Was there someone that, gave you that confidence to do it?
There was people that encouraged me, yes. Yes.
Like who?
Everyone in
The
my
outside
family encouraged me. I mean, I've had encouragement all the time to excel in my career and be of another voice and understand and learn and understand the capacity in which I'm working in. And
Well, I'll tell you, when I first got elected 21 years ago, I looked at all of the boards and commissions and I was appalled. The parole board had all prosecutors. And so I worked to change that. I went to the legislators. It hadn't complied to the state statute for 30 years since Governor Dukakis when I got on. And so little by little, we've got good people. But unfortunately, in the last years, he's removed some wonderful people. Wonderful people. I mentioned it here today. And it's too bad because they were dedicated. And the way they were let go, no one should. I mean, one of them that I talked about, Lucy Soto, who had, who was a victim witness, and she had all that experience, life experience. She was called in December 31st of the year 2 years ago. And she was told, don't go to Chicopee on Wednesday because you're not going to preside over the hearing. Here's your insurance papers, you're through. You're through. So that's how it is. I mean, and it's wrong because we've lost valuable people. I mean, I want life experience, not just, not just on the paper what you've done, but what you've seen in your life. And what I saw in you, as far as I look for compassion, and for you to see this 9-year-old girl, to love her and to adopt her, I mean, that's the best you can say about compassion and empathy, but especially when you had children. You got 5 children now, so I have 4. So I know. But so is there anything that, that you feel out of the positions that you had, what position do you think gives you the most experience to be on the parole board?
my life experience, what I've gone through from when I can remember until now. It planted a seed in me. I have a heart to do what I do. I don't do it for any amount of money.
Well, you're not gonna make me cry or make you cry, but losing your father at 10 years old, I mean, that has to be so traumatic. So I think that's where you have your compassion and empathy. Now, what I'm concerned about is that you never went to the parole board hearing just to see how it operates, to see how they ask questions. And, I have gone. I've been in prisons. I've gone to drug court. I've gone to drug graduations. I'm not a lawyer. And I sat in the back. They didn't know who I was, but I learned. And you know what? We had this bad reputation out there that's false, that they're mean people on the parole board and everything. I went to a lifers hearing and they were calling him sir. Sir. I just was amazed by it, you know? So what do you see? I mean, have you looked into the parole board? Have you looked at the record? Is there anything you'd like to change that you think has to be changed?
Well, I can say that all of the injustices that are faced, and I think it's in every system, it's going on everywhere. It's not just the parole board, but I think it's important to look into how and why and how people get paroled and why they don't get paroled. And then, and you can, have concern and certainly think about and make suggestions to how it can be better, how we can go forward and move in a better light with the governor's council, who you guys make lots of decisions and your opinion matters, right? So it is important to me. And those are some of the things, race, a community-based services, what's out there for our inmates and how they're gonna re-enter. Those are things that I am concerned about. And those are things I am interested in finding out more about.
I want a commitment that you will follow up on these people that were paroled. Because I have been here a while, and I was here when Finelli was released. I voted against, I was the only one that voted against that chair. He was the driver when the governor was campaigning. He was a former police officer, but that didn't enter into it. And anyway, I called him the day after the officer was killed. I went to that funeral, it was tragic. And I asked him, what protocol did you use when you released Sinelli? And he lied. Everything that he said, I found out was a lie. He said that he was, I think it was a plumbing internship. He was living with his uncle and he was paying rent to the uncle and he was seeing his probation officer every week. None of the above. And there was no one checking. And so as a governor's counselor, I don't know that. So people blame me. People ask me, like I have something to do with that. He had 3 life sentences. I didn't know 15 years was a life sentence, but that's what it was. So I'm just saying that I want to know that the parole, when you're on that board, if you are appointed, that you follow up to see if they're doing their job, because he wasn't doing his job. And what happened, the fallout, the governor threw everybody off, and there was only 2 left. And all those people that were supposed to be released couldn't be released. You know why? Because they couldn't have life hearings. They only had 2. They only had 2. And those people stayed in prison because he let them all go. Hey, I'm not a rocket scientist, but you know what I would have done? I would have got recalled judges to be there. Don't keep these people. You had to keep going with the process and it stopped. And so I'm concerned about the process. And I'm concerned how much you will be involved to make sure when you vote for that person is getting the services and is taking advantage of it and is seeing all of the people he's seeing and doing the things that he's supposed to be doing. Do you think you do that?
I agree with you. Verification and follow-up is extremely important, and it has to be done. Has to be done.
Well, like I said, I don't have to be a lawyer. I've worked hard at it and I understand it and I know it. And there could be better ways that we could have done this, because there were people that were supposed to be out like the next week. And he murdered that officer the day after Christmas. And so everything stopped. Everything stopped. So anyway, I'm going to stop going down memory lane and I'll stop there. But we have a lot to think about. But I do want to put that letter to rest because I don't think it has any, you have answered the questions. And as I said, I mean, she's come again in opposition to some of the finest people we've put on the parole board, believe me. So I appreciate her letter, and it'll be noted that we did go through it, but it wasn't received until this morning. It was very late. So that's why, and I scribbled so much over it that no one could read it anyway. So, but thank you for your time. And,
Thank you, Counselor
you
Devaney.
know, and if there's anything else that you want to submit to the council and to your counselor, please feel free to do that because there was this was a long day for you. And we never should have two. And I've been sitting here since 9:45. So I just want, you know, I just want to give you the opportunity to, if you want to put anything in writing, however you want to give it to your counselor and have it, because, you know, having something negative like that said is not pleasant for you to sit through. So I thank you for your time. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Counselor.
My pleasure. And I just want to add one thing. You introduced Delano Bailey, who is here
Delano.
today in
Yes.
support.
Yes.
All right. What does he do?
He's a child advocate for the CPCS, the same department that wrote that letter. He's here in my support.
Okay. So for the edification of the counselors, during that short recess that we took, he came up to me and he said to me, I can't believe that there's any negative about Sherquita because she always, when she worked with me, thought outside the box to do what was best for the children involved. And he wanted to stay to testify, but his ride had to go.
Oh,
Okay?
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
I hear a lot of positive things about you, and I thank you for being here. And I regret to tell you that you're going to be sitting in traffic for a couple of hours. So
you
may
will
wanna-
too.
You may want to have dinner close by.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you,
bet.
Counselor Hurley.
Thank you, counselors.
Thank you all, counselors, so much.
Did everybody sign the papers? There's one here.
Yes.
Okay, good. So thank you, and we are adjourned.